Trails Board. Congratulations on that.
I'm the interim one-day chair. One-day wonders.
Well, you never know these things. There's nothing so permanent as temporary.
That's right.
Because we all know we're expect it and try to make it permanent. Okay, I'll be glad to facilitate the meeting. So I'll call to order a special joint meeting with the BOCC, Board of County Commissioners, and the Open Space and Trails Board for first quarter updates. And I would just like everyone to refer to the agenda. So we do have some time allotments for the various topics, the four or five topics that are listed by Dale and his crew. So if we can stay within those time allotments, I think we'll be able to exit this at our target 12:45 completion time. I will watch the clock, which no one else can see except the chair.
Okay.
So, Dale, would you like to give us an update on the Grossing Mountain Plan interim and long-range planning efforts?
Sure, Howie, but before I do that, I do want to jump to one quick note, which is that I want to thank Franz Froliker for 5 years of great service on the board. Franz has provided a lot more leadership on several tough issues than I was expecting when he first arrived as our resident ice climber and rock climber and so on. We do, unfortunately, now need to fill our District 5 seat beginning in May. And we have one interested candidate who just walked in. I wanted to introduce Ty Jacober. Is interested in applying for that seat. So, with that...
Dale, how will you be getting the word out to other potentially interested candidates?
The county has been advertising, and so far we've had one other applicant who turned out to be out of district. George and I discussed yesterday, since he's most familiar with the District 5 voter list, who else might be out there.
I was thinking maybe let the caucuses know within the district that the seat's open.
Just staying on this point, what's our deadline to fill that? Do we have a...
Well, it's sort of open until filled. Ideally, we would have someone by the first meeting in May. But we've had times before when we haven't been able to fill the seat immediately upon the end of the last term.
So Franz's term completes at the end of this month, or can he go on an interim basis until it's filled? How is that procedurally dealt with?
My understanding is his term runs through the end of April.
End of April, okay.
Yeah, we obviously will do the usual things with our, patent advertising also. And the only thing I'd like to know is, do we have kind of a set time? Do we always try to do a month, 6 weeks, whatever? I mean, if a bunch of candidates show up, it's one thing, but fairness to the public, to at least give them a chance. So we're not going to discuss that now. I mean, solve that, but staff needs to figure out what's appropriate. Maybe just touch base with us. Because I'm sure everyone wants to fill it, even though we hate seeing the man leave. The ice climber, that's a good one. I'll get back into that in a couple of years.
Okay, well, thanks for letting me deviate a little bit. Now, the first thing we want to talk about is the planning we are undertaking for a huge assemblage of property, which is depicted on the map behind Rachel. And it's been very exciting for me, one, to be done with the purchase of the Drosty property, which just about wore Barb and I out last year, and also the county attorney. But now that that's done, what we've moved on to is the really fun part of this, which is to look at this property as well as an assemblage of other properties and begin planning for a mountain park. We were successful at getting Snowmass Village to throw in some 850 acres of their own lands, and Gary will talk about these in more detail. The city of Aspen is also very excited about this larger area and has included several parcels that they own. But we're now looking at a unit of about 2,500 acres right between Snowmass and Aspen. As you can see on the map, the western boundary of this unit is right on the urban boundary of Snowmass Village. But it also runs down to the lower right-hand corner there is the city limits of Aspen, right at the end of the runway. So this mountain park literally ties our two main up valley municipalities together, and at the same time is critical wildlife habitat. So our challenge, is we were just discussing with the Open Space Board, will be how to balance the needs of the wildlife and the rare plants with the humans that are all anxious to get up there. I'll turn this over to Gary, and he can talk about the various pieces of the interim and long-range planning that we're working on.
So, when purchasing Drosty, when the actual happened, which I bet against, and I was wrong, I'm happy I'm wrong, because when you look at Drosty, you see the Drosty right there, that is the key connection between all of the properties that really would connect, Aspen to Snowmass. And so once we started really looking at that and going, what can we do here? And the city of Aspen wanted to join in, and then the town of Snowmass Village wanted to join in with their two large properties. We saw, incredible wildlife enhancement, protection. We saw incredible recreation opportunities. And then, the exciting part now is to start planning for all of this. And so with the planning part is really to try to come together with the town of Snowmass Village and the city of Aspen to look at this region as one and try to plan it as one and try to not look at it, Drosty has this management, Seven Star has that, Hidden Valley and Snowmass has that, but how are we going to brand this? How are we going to bring this all together into one property? Plus, you do have the Pickens County Airport, which has pretty impressive wildlife habitat on the fringes, too. So, where potential trail connections would go through. So, what staff has done is we're breaking it up into two processes. We're doing an interim management planning process, which is happening right now. We're completing it hopefully this week for staff review. And then the process on the interim plan will, in the beginning of April, we'll bring it to the Open Space Board. We'll start doing some public open houses to look at the interim plan, and then, look at, for the Open Space Board, Town of Snowmass Village, and City of Aspen review, so we could get this potentially adopted as an interim plan in April, end of April, beginning of May at the latest. And so with that interim planning process is to try to, what staff has worked with, the Division of Wildlife.
You like this?
Oh, beautiful.
Thanks, Fran.
Thanks, Fred. So with staff is working with the Town of Snowmass Village, the Division of Wildlife. One of the things we are doing is we're hiring wildlife and vegetation consultants. Their request for proposals are coming in today, so they will be on board by the beginning of April.
Does it work? I don't think it's working.
Oh, there we go. So what we're going to try to do is create a corridor from Hidden Valley, which is Town of Snowmass Village property, where the Highline Trail is, and you have the Hidden Valley Cemetery right there, is try to connect this to the existing road network that's already on the top 7 Star and Drosty, and then potentially work with the airport to see if we can use the radar road there to connect into the Owl Creek Trail. And so when talking with the Division of Wildlife here, this would be the only new trail that's really built this year, before the wildlife studies are done and everything. And one of the big things for the Division of Wildlife is seasonal closures. And we instituted that. And they're very excited about the potential for Snowmass Village looking at some seasonal closures on properties too, to protect the wildlife that we will study, and we'll find out when and times and all that. But potentially for them in the summer is not as critical to the elk migration, and this is not seen as a calving area. But what we're going to do is we're going to create these blobs, which are basically recreation corridors. We're not going to cite specific trails until, basically we can get up on the properties. It's really muddy and still snowy up there. and then also, work with our wildlife consultants, work with the Division of Wildlife and Vegetation consultants to really route a sustainable trail that connects to the existing road system. And then from there, use the existing road system, potentially temporarily, because who knows if that's a truly sustainable way in the future to get around there. We might reroute it in some places and restore some areas of it, but it is a disturbance that's already there. So connect there. It's also the highlight. When you get up there, that's where we've been taking everyone, and you can see the massive views of Snowmass and Aspen and the mountains around here. And then we're going to see if we can work with the airport to come down off the airport road to connect to here. That's besides the Brush Creek Trail, which exists already, which the Brush Creek Trail will have a full equestrian connection now. That was one of the great things about the Drosty purchase, was that there used to be a gap right here where equestrians were not allowed, and then we're going to basically fill that gap this year and work to potentially create a soft surface next to the pavement so horses can connect from, at least this summer, from Cozy Point all the way to the rodeo grounds in Snowmass Village. And so that's basically the interim plan. To protect wildlife in the interim plan, the rest of the property, except for the existing trails where the rim trail is and the trail that is built up here, the rest of the properties will be closed. And so we're going to work really hard with meeting with all the user groups and everybody else to have them understand that the planning process is happening right now, and that we have access, we've provided some access, and for future access, everyone needs to kind of cooperate on a future planning process that's going to happen this summer. And so far, we have met with the Town of Snowmass Trails Committee, because they recommend usually to the Town of Snowmass Village any new trails, and most of that trail is going to be on Town of Snowmass Village property. They are very excited about the process. They're very excited about joining us. They understand that this property was also a wildlife purchase. It wasn't just totally. The reason why Snowmass Village got those two properties, Hidden Valley and Upper North Mesa, was for the protection of wildlife. So, how we go about doing it all is going to remains to be seen, but that's the exciting part of this process. Seems like there's a lot of people who want to join along in the process, and so that's where we are right now. And hopefully, staff's goal is to have this full management plan done by the time winter comes along next year.
Since our board's already been briefed on this from our prior meeting, dedicate most of this time to the commissioners' questions.
Okay, thank you. These are comments more than questions, but you mentioned the wildlife that is habitat that is on the airport property, and I think that it just brings up kind of a tangential relationship to me, but I think that open space and trails and the management of this area needs to look at and potentially weigh in on the airport master plan and some of the work that's ongoing with design charrettes and looking at the long-term plan for the airport. And I don't know if we've invited it specifically the DOW to comment on the airport master plan, but I think we should as well. I would hate to put all this time and money into really securing the wildlife and the wildlife habitat on the Drosty areas and then have the immediate adjacency to the airport not considered. So that's...
Well, it's a great, and I didn't bring up that point, but that we are working with the airport to make sure that whatever wildlife consultant we use works with their wildlife consultants, because they are looking at wildlife in a little different way because of the way the airport is situated.
Keep them off the runway.
But I think we can have very compatible potential projects, because if we can do restoration potentially in other areas of our property, and that restoration will keep wildlife away from their hazard areas, that's a benefit for both the airport and Doug. So it's a great suggestion, and we are definitely going to work with them on that. Thank you.
Okay, George?
I just caught the very end of the Open Space and Trails Board meeting, but I heard that the discussion centered around the rangers in terms of having the ability to be up there. I just see that this area has tremendous potential for use by the public, but also it has potential for abuse as well. And I think it's going to be critical that we do have an ongoing staff person up there, certainly in the early stages of this, to ensure that people just don't go all over the place and start to create banded trails that we've seen up in Smuggler.
And John answered that question in the last meeting by saying, basically, we did get another seasonal ranger. You guys approved that budget, and it's more critical now that you purchased Drosty, but it's definitely going to be on our radar, where John was talking potentially of putting somebody there almost every day, especially at the beginning when that is open, when that trail is open, is to try to educate as many users as possible. I think one of the biggest things is going to be with the user groups and trying to include everybody into this planning. One of the biggest problems we see is when people don't feel included is when they start doing illegal trail building. And if they feel included, one of the things that we've been very successful on Smuggler Mountain is by including as many people as possible into the decision-making on the trails and everything like that. We have definitely avoided a lot of any illegal trail building. And so we're hoping on this one that we will get the same level of cooperation.
Good. George, question answered?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Jack?
Yeah, obviously, hats off to everyone that participated, including everyone in this room, the city staff, Somass Village, and the public who really helped us out.
And
with the
GoPro.
vote. And yes, of course, our partners there, can't forget them. Yeah, this is a wonderful purchase, but I am really concerned, and George alluded to it, about potential impacts, because I don't think we'll have any problem having people up there enjoying themselves. And the first thing I'd say, and I've talked to Kevin Wright, that I am very concerned about the dates, and I hope we can do some on-ground proofing, whatever, as we evolve this plan. I know what's set now, and that's good, but we'll call this an interim step. So we're going to have to use a lot of resources to understand the exact dates. And I had, all the years that I've been involved in, I should say I and we, in the wildlife issues, the dates kind of come and go, but there's a lot of pressure on the DOW to arrive at dates. So let's just make sure that we have, we're open to an adjustment if necessary, and that'll have to be ground-proofed, certainly. Question, May 19th, Roaring Fork Conservancy interpretive tour. How would we expect to get up there? Just kind of...
Well, to answer that one, I mean, the basic, what we're hoping for is to be able to, the town of Somass Village should not put a seasonal closure on Hidden Valley yet. So right now, if we site that trail as well as possible to mitigate impacts, we'll be able to, if they do approve this, they will be able to start building that trail. There's not a major connection through Seven Star to the existing road. So we should have at least a basic way through for people on the 19th. We're figuring that we'll have options for that to happen.
Yeah, and we have, as Open Space, touched base with the cemetery committee, because there are sites both on that ridge as well as down below. So we want to be real sensitive so we don't get any irritants, here when we go to siting, and make sure that they've been included.
And,
Town council, whatever, but...
We're relying on the Snowmass Council to handle that relationship, because it does exist.
Well, and that's good, but just if you wouldn't mind a heads up to say, hey, guys, have you checked in, or however you want to handle it. I think it's important, because this is a magnificent purchase, and don't have to say any more.
Bob?
In one of your opening paragraphs here, you talk about the first, let me say, fabulous putting this whole connection together. I wanted to say that first, and then I jumped into my question. Seeing and talking to you folks about how this all connects with everything is just absolutely amazing, and it's going to be such a great amenity, so fabulous work. You talk about how the Open Space Fund can repay its short-term general fund by year-end without bonding. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that and also talk about future expenditures and budgets on what expense we can see happening out of the open space fund for this piece of property. You talked about a wildlife study. I think you said $30,000 for a wildlife study. What other expenditures over the next couple of years are we going to see on this whole corridor of properties?
Sure. If I might suggest we hold off on your first part of your question until Tom Oken arrives, because we're going to do a whole State of the Open Space Fund report when he gets here, and he'll answer that question in detail. As far as the specific expenses we anticipate, I'll let Gary take that one.
Yeah, I mean, what we're looking for, the wildlife study was the first, and that's going to be a pretty sizable expense of around $30,000. And from there on, I mean, it's trail building. Most of the trail building will either be done in-house with existing staff resources and existing equipment, working with the town of Snowmass Village and the city of Aspen on that. And then, we're hoping to use Roaring Fork outdoor volunteer labor. The Roaring Fork Horse Council has offered some of their labor to do that. The restoration projects are definitely going to be expenses for the future. And so we haven't really come up with those yet, but you will see them as the main management plan is being complete. We're going to put numbers together with that. It's nowhere near the $17 million that you just purchased for Drosty, but they're going to be significant. I mean, there's definitely habitat on that property that hasn't been touched in many, many years. Can we burn? That's the cheapest option. The option for burning is probably limited because of all the houses that are near there, but so that does more expense on hydro chopping or some other type of habitat enhancement project. So, but we'll bring all of those to you. But there are definitely going to be some long-term expenditures. And hopefully with our partnership, all of those expenditures will be split by the partners. But also we have a partnership that can go for great grants. And there's a lot of Division of Wildlife, Habitat Improvement grants, Trout Unlimited grants. You name the grant, we'll be going for those.
Other board comments?
Well, I have a comment question. Gary, could you talk a little bit about, you had mentioned branding and naming on this, and given our status in this area as a destination resort, could you talk about the where and how you're going to plan branding and names?
Yeah. I mean, basically, the branding is going to happen while we're doing the main management plan. All three jurisdictions, obviously, we're doing some of the historical review of historical land use and stuff like that with the wildlife, so hopefully we'll find some anecdotal information that could really help us find a name for this. But what we've been thinking about, and what Dale was talking about yesterday, is potentially using the City of Aspen's, Picking County's, and Town of Snowmass Village's PR departments to kind of try to spearhead a brand for this area. What are we going to call this? How are we going to market this area? Because it does have that lovely connection between Snowmass Village and Aspen. I mean, and also if we're going to do some major wildlife habitat enhancement and protection, we want that to be highlighted. We want that to be shown, because we're hoping that we come up with projects that really, truly are reputable. I mean, not reputable projects, but repeatable on many other different projects, and they actually show how this partnership can really protect a corridor between two pretty large resort areas. And so how can you do all the resort development with ski areas and everything, but also how do the communities figure out a way to protect the wildlife in between? How do they protect the wildlife corridors? How do they connect it to trails? I mean, this to me is larger than just picking out a name, but it's kind of getting an identity for this area. So it actually attaches Aspen and Snowmass in a way that's different than just they have a ski area over there and a ski area over here.
Well, so, Chad?
Gary, you alluded to a partnership also including some funding. We can't probably certainly define that now, but I certainly would be interested in that being a piece of the partnership in a fair way. You know, we're not asking Snowmass Village or Aspen to come up big to manage the majority of this, which, you know, is certainly Pickens County open space. But there should be some help, and I'm really thinking about the true cost of a ranger, and when all of this is said and done, and if people have access, you know, even if it's only seasonal, they're probably going to need a ranger in the area in and of itself, you know, because we also have the valley floor, et cetera. So, you know, that partnership is more important as we come up with more than just plans, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
We have a little bit of a analogy in the Aspen Snowmass Nordic program, and the Nordic Council for years has spanned the same 3 jurisdictions that we're talking about now. So if we use that as a model, then maybe that would help.
Let's wrap this up. I think there's 2 models, that from a trails plan, and also the joint effort on Smuggler Mountain, that had an interim plan once the acquisition was occurred, and then joint effort between the city and county created a much more comprehensive, basically a 10-year management plan that's now being proposed and just about ready for adoption. So what I see to kind of wrap this up is you're really tasked with creating an interim plan for the use of these parcels, this 2,500 acres, which will lead to yet a more comprehensive plan based on the research and the data that you gather over the next period of time. So just a timing question, Gary. How long do you foresee the interim plan going? Will it be in 12-month increments or longer based on, and that would be perhaps subject to funding issues and research issues?
Yeah, I mean, basically what we're looking at, the interim plan is to expire when we make the full management plan complete. I mean, we're pretty confident that between all our staffs and the consultants that we're hiring, that we can come up with a management plan. The management plan never answers all the questions. You brought up a good point. Smuggler, we did an interim, we did a full management plan. And when the full management plan was done in 2008, it had a lot of questions and then, you know, action items that come out of it. And so the forest management plan out of the main management plan is now out of that. So that management plan will be done, hopefully, I mean, I'm pretty confident we can get it done before the end of this year. And so that will then spur restoration projects, that'll spur new trails, that'll spur all the other things that we do. And that's where Smuggler was a great example. City of Aspen, Pickens County, 50-50 partners through the whole process. It's been a great partnership. It's worked extremely well. And I'm hoping to replicate it here. This is a much larger assemblage of properties, but I think we can do that.
And so that's an interesting way to end it, because it segues to the next item on our agenda, this Smuggler Mountain Long-Range Forestry Plan update. So that's just interesting to know for everyone here. The first 2 items on our agenda are not acquisition items, really talking about management issues, management challenges of the open space that we've spent our public funds on, and which is part of our joint responsibility. So it's a compelling responsibility for both the county and the city. Who will give us a recap on the Smuggler Mountain?
Let me
Going back in the hot seat again.
I'll make a few introductory comments so that I don't feel left out. I'm really excited about this plan because it shows what we can do once we've got our feet on the ground, and it somewhat answers the question Rob had of, well, what comes next? And what impresses me so much about this Smuggler plan is that we've had foresters up there and ecologists looking at that property we acquired. We spent some $15 million just on the middle part of this Smuggler property. It's surrounded by lesser acquisitions that go back to the 1970s. And now we're finally getting a chance to see what we got. And what we learned in my sort of layperson's short form is that the forest on Smuggler all grew back after Smuggler was scalped during the silver boom. And most of those trees up there are between 90 and 110 years old. and that doesn't create a healthy forest. So the plan that Gary has worked up with the city of Aspen is really designed to address that sort of unnatural character of what's there and guide the forest back to something that's more resilient.
Well, correct. I mean, basically what we've been working on for the last 2.5 years on the Smuggler Forest up there is to, first of all, we obviously, were pushed really fast to make something happen immediately due to the beetle. The pine beetle was coming, everyone was really nervous. We had offers of financial assistance and all of this stuff. And so what we've done for the last 2 years is kind of just try to put a Band-Aid on the problem. That's what we really knew at Smuggler, was the fact that this is a disturbance-driven ecosystem up there. It's a disturbance-driven forest, and disturbance needs to happen. And the reality is disturbance usually happens by fire or avalanche or something up there. And the reality is it's too close to Aspen to allow that to happen. So how do we create a more resilient forest in the future without allowing the natural disturbances to happen? And so what we've come up with is a really long-term management plan that we feel addresses, a lot of the main goals of the original Smuggler Mountain Management Plan, but it also addresses the goals of the Open Space Department. It allows for a recreation component, which is pretty large up there, to continue. Because if you allow the forest to fail and you just allow natural nature just to let it happen, a lot of these trees are going to fall as they end their life cycle or as the beetles get to some of them. And, that's not the safest recreational setting to put up there. It's also not the greatest aesthetic for a recreational component for the management plan. And then you have, your basic thing is how to really manage this forest in a way that benefits wildlife. We have some extremely good wildlife habitat up on Smuggler, and I'll point to it. It's this area right up here. Has no trails. We didn't propose any trails. We basically worked with all the recreational users and our wildlife consultants to basically put that one off of limits to people because it's incredible aspen stand. It's one of the few aspen stands that has no sign of the sudden aspen death syndrome. It has it's a persistent aspen stand. We have a lot of new growth in this area. It's incredible wildlife habitat. But then we have other areas that have been pretty heavily disturbed by humans in the past. I mean, obviously, this whole area was logged when the mining came through. And so this whole area is basically all between actually 90 and 125 years old. And lodgepole pine usually starts to see some failure around 150. And so to try to get this forest, we look at the gamble oak. What you see on Smuggler is really not the lodgepole and the aspen. For most people, what they look up at aspen is the gamble oak in the front, in the face. The gamble oak is the big part that people see. And that, too, hasn't had any disturbance in, about 80, 100 years. Gamble oak usually burns between, every 25 to 80 years. And gamble oak usually it's a very hot and dry area. So this is all very good wildlife habitat, but it's all at the same age. And so we're at that age level where, some disturbance in certain areas would really help create the overall species diversity, age diversity that we've been talking about since we started with the beetle mitigation a couple of years ago. So what we're proposing up there is not full-scale logging. What we're proposing is to do some cuts. And it will be logging cuts, but it will be in areas that are operable. We're not looking at the areas that we have to use helicopters. Then we're not looking at areas that have slopes of over 35%. Those are very difficult areas to operate in, and that's why we've always used the helicopter in the past. The areas we're looking at now are basically opening cuts to see what comes back. Will it be aspen? Will it be lodgepole? We're not going to really dictate what comes back, but we're going to provide the disturbance to allow that to start. And, most of these are 3/4 acre cuts. They've already had some heavy beetle activity in them, so they've already had a decent amount of trees taken out of those areas. So what we're seeing now with these cuts is to kind of continue to provide the openings to allow some new growth to start. And, we're also proposing to do we're going to continue some beetle mitigation through our consultants. We feel that it's, extremely important to at least take the brood trees that we have identified down. And we can do a lot of that either in place if it's inaccessible, because it's not that many. I mean, we have about 20 to 30 brood trees that we'll need to remove. A lot of them are right here in the areas that we're going to already be removing these trees. We're right near them. But, there's some in these areas. We can treat them in place. They're pretty close to trails of road. It's not going to be that difficult to continue. And it provides a level of, we want some old growth. We've identified some areas of lodgepole that we would like to see some old growth lodgepole continue. And so, we want that age diversity where we're starting some new growth and you want some old growth. I mean, it provides wildlife habitat for the old growth. And then, what we're going to do also in 2011 is start looking at some of the aspen stands that are not in great shape and try to do some prescriptions for those aspen stands. So in 2013, we can do some either cuttings or certain types of removals to try to stimulate new growth in those areas. And then also what we're going to look at is right here is a Gamble Oak area, and it's pretty close to Smuggler Mountain Road. It's accessible, and try to get a prescription together for a 2012 cut in the Gamble Oak, so we can actually get some pretty good wildlife habitat regeneration here. We're going to try to do a cut large enough that doesn't create an ice cream parlor, because one of the biggest questions we always get is if you don't do something big enough, the wildlife will just congregate in the area that you cut, because the new growth is vigorous, it's very yummy to all the wildlife, and they come in droves. So we try to maintain a large enough cut area to avoid that type of stuff. And then one of the biggest things we have to always work with is the fire district, and we've been working with them really closely because they were trying to develop a community wildfire protection plan. Obviously, Smuggler Mountain is within the wildland-urban interface, and so we're going to have to work with them and on potential fuel loading and stuff like that.
So there you have it. And again, County Open Spaces had a briefing on this, so entertain any questions or clarification from the board.
Just go down the line. Thanks again for all of your board's hard work, and if I hadn't said that on Drosty, it certainly meant that from my heart as well. The one thing I'm kind of wondering, I think the plan looks great. I think it's incremental. I think it's comprehensive. I think it's the type of things you want to see in a long-range management plan, and acknowledging, as we all have, that we have a disturbed forest to begin with, and we don't see the type of natural disturbance that keeps a healthy forest. But I'm wondering, do we have any surveying or information of the Forest Service lands surrounding the park that talk about what is the beetle kill infestation rate, the amount of new brood trees in those areas, or is that something the Forest Service is taking an active look at managing their properties adjacent to ours, since we're doing, some proactive work?
The Forest Service has worked with us. They have allowed us to survey this area right through here as kind of a reference stand, because we've done a lot of monitoring. The only reason why we could say that the brood tree removal and the vermin is working, because we've had a reference stand that's had no management actions taking place. And they did a stand survey. We participated in that stand survey, so they do have forest information. And I know they are working on a plan for Smuggler Mountain. Actually, at 1 o'clock, I'm meeting with the Forest Service about potential management actions on Smuggler Mountain that they might potentially be proposing in the near future. So, yes, we do work with the Forest Service. Hopefully, they will provide comments. We provided them a copy of this forest management plan a while ago. They've been a very cooperative partner, and we've been really lucky with the Forest Service that we have in place right now, that they seem to be much more active, because not only for forestry, but for trail construction, trail maintenance, and monitoring with enforcement, they're starting to look at, this is more of a seamless area, because the boundary, as you can see, is haphazard. And with a haphazard boundary, the public doesn't know, and public doesn't probably care what property they are on. They really want to know that it's being managed in a safe way, and that basically, what are the regulations, and if we could have some seamless management through this whole area, that would really benefit the public, and seamless sign package and everything else would be really critical.
Thank you.
Okay, George?
Gary, are you looking at doing any, when you're looking at doing some brood tree removal this summer, the Forest Service is actually looking at doing a project over at Starwood for the same purpose, and I think they were anticipating using a helicopter. Are you looking at trying to piggyback off of that resource at the same time to utilize the helicopter as well for any of that, the removal?
We might. Really, we'll put out requests for proposals to do these cuts, and if it works with timing, if they can come up with, a price that really works, or, the fact that they can get it all done in a day makes a really big difference. If we can make it happen within our budget, I think we would look at helicopter removal of those cut areas. We'll look at that, but it's sometimes really hard to mix projects. But if the helicopter's in the area and doing work, it's going to be a lot cheaper for us to just have them do this, and it'll be a lot quicker and a lot less impact on the public. So we're definitely going to look at it. I just don't know. We're meeting with the Forest Service, I think in a couple weeks, to go over that project, and I'll be there, and I'm going to work with them really carefully on when they're going to do it and see if we can coincide. Okay.
Great. Jack?
Yeah, I understand the need for selective cuts and brush removal, et cetera, due to the lack of a fire regime. But I would ask this, because I assume we're going to go up there and, you've identified an area, you'll stake it off, whatever. I'd like to be able to, this summer, have a chance to be alerted that maybe I could go out. I'd like to see what it looks like before it got cut, and then when it's cut, and I don't know if anyone else, your board's going to look at that, but I'd like to be included because it's an evolution. I'm of the philosophy of cutting trees isn't all that good, but I completely understand and support the need because this is the 21st century, not the 19th.
So what you're suggesting is some sort of field trip up there.
Yeah, maybe a site visit
Public,
of some sort.
elected officials, volunteers, as well as public in general, to see the before and potential, so that then they can refer to the after as well.
Yeah, because I think we're going to want to do this periodically in a lot of places, and I'm hoping we can figure out a way to do fire on Drosty and working with the fire districts because of all that open service buried. But that's for the future. This is a beginning of a certain newer process, at least for me.
Dale?
Just a quick footnote on Jack's comment that when we presented this to the open space boards of both the county and the city, there was interest in us making sure we capture all the educational value that would come out of this. It's kind of a laboratory up there, and to the extent we can include the local schools or capture the before and after information in a way that it has greater meaning to people, we're going to do that.
And we'll work on the timing, and I'll work with John on saying here's a good time to come up and see if you can schedule something with the BOCC. And
Excellent. That could be included in your you've got a deadline by tomorrow of...
I'm writing all the comments down.
Okay, good. Franz?
I just have one quick comment. In looking at that map, if you look at those cuts, they look either square or round or oval or something. But I know there's an irregular border there. That's something we went over in our meeting, in case you're wondering.
Okay. They're not rectangles. Thank you.
Robert?
Again, it looks like a great comprehensive plan and great work. One question I have is, it seems like a couple of these cuts are really close to that kind of Hunter Creek loop that gets a lot of traffic. Are there going to be any projected closures to access to these areas due to some of your work up there?
There might be. Potentially, and that's why George brought up a good point about the helicopter. If it's available and feasible economically, we would rather the helicopter is as quick as possible. The thing with the cuts, if you do it more traditionally, we don't necessarily need to close it for significant periods of time, but when a truck is coming through and we just have flaggers there to basically close it for that little period. We have other options to get people up and through there now, so these wouldn't be long-term delays. I mean, as much as it takes to get a truck or a tree up there, it would be closed and flagged. People would be actually up there flagging and stopping people, but it wouldn't be, except if we do a helicopter, it wouldn't be like full-day closures and stuff like that.
Michael?
Regarding the helicopter use, I've always opposed the helicopter use. I just think it's inimical to management. I mean, they were okay for Vietnam, I guess, but they're not good for the forest now. And I think that you should consider hand removal. There's enough people in Pickens County who are unemployed, who are looking for work, who would make terrific sawyers, that you should consider an alternate use. Horses, people on foot, they can do very little damage, and you can employ people. But helicopters, and I talked to the Forest Service about helicopter use at Starwood, and I had the same problem with it, that it's just not a long-term management tool on any kind of scale, and it should be avoided. They're okay for other uses, but for forestry management, particularly long-term forestry management, helicopters just are not the answer. So given the employment situation in Pickens County, I think you put a lot of people to work, just like the Civilian Conservation Corps did excellent work in this country in reforestation and forest management for many years, and I just think that's the direction to go in.
Jack, do you have another comment?
Yeah, I would support Michael's thoughts as a request. Investigate it, understand the liability, etc., and the facilitation timing and all that. But Michael, at this point, doesn't speak for the board. I mean, I'm willing to absolutely include helicopters if this is the strategy that we have to do to get this done. But I would give consideration to what Michael said, and we have to, do a little research on that one. I'm mostly afraid of the liability.
Agreed.
So, kind of wrap up, that sort of circles back to the February 7th memo from both Gary and Chris Foreman, the city forester, which in its last paragraph called for comments with respect to their management plan to be presented to the city and or the county's open space and parks, open space boards and parks committees, parks boards for Smuggler Mountain Forestry management plan by tomorrow, March 23rd. Is that date still firm? Do you have any extension of it? Are you getting any response?
We are getting some response. We're definitely getting agency response from the Division of Wildlife and others. We are having a public open house tomorrow night in the Sister Cities room at the City Hall from 6 to 7:30. And we're hoping that people show up if they have comments. The public comment, we're never if we get public comments after the 23rd, obviously we're going to take them. We're not coming to you guys until the 7th of April to basically come with all the comments and everything else and come with a potential adoption of this. So obviously if people have comments they can't make it by the 23rd deadline, we'll still accept them. But know that we are trying to move this along because we would like to do the project this spring to minimize any summer impacts to this, and also if there are brood trees up there, also to get them kind of out of there before the beetle flight starts in July.
So Marcy Griffin, so you in your report can say tomorrow night between 6 and 7:30 is public input on the Smuggler Mountain Management Plan.
Where's the location?
Location is City Council chambers?
It's the Sister Cities in City Hall.
In City Hall.
And we've been advertising it, and we've heard some response. Hopefully we'll get some people.
Great. So, any other comments? We wrap up the Smuggler Mountain long-range forestry plan and move into our open fund status, which really underlies our list be able to pay for these responsibilities that we've taken up.
Thanks, Howie, and I'll invite Tom to come up here and join me.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much.
What we want to do today is give you kind of a snapshot of where we are. We're not going to attempt to go through our budget line items in any great detail, but we did change our financial strategy since the last time we've had a chance to meet with all the county commissioners, so we thought it was important to bring you up to date on that. And without going into the spreadsheet, it is in your packet. Tom's going to walk us through how we repay our purchase of the Drosty property, potentially without the need to sell bonds.
Yeah, where we last left this in December as we were closing on the Drosty property. We acknowledged that the Open Space Fund did not have adequate cash to fully fund the $17 million acquisition. And as it turned out, it was about $10 million short of that $17 million figure. So the plan was for the general fund to just loan that $7 million or so, or $10 million or so, to the Open Space Fund until we got into this year. And then we were planning on issuing $10 million of general obligation bonds that the board had already authorized in December to issue. But when we got into January of this year, we noticed, one, the municipal bond market was fairly unsettled, meaning interest rates were quite high relative to where they had been just several months prior. And it also appeared that there really weren't any pending major acquisitions on the open space agenda. So we ran kind of a quick cash flow schedule of what the Open Space Fund was going to look like for the year if there were not any acquisitions, and that's pretty much what you have in front of you. And what that showed was that because we are collecting $12.5 million in property tax for the Open Space Fund this year, that together with the GOCO grant of $2.5 million that was yet to come in, the contributions from Aspen and Snowmass, all of that put together into this cash flow schedule indicated that by June of this year, the Open Space Fund could fully repay the $10 million to the general fund. So given that situation, and without really having an acquisition on the table, another acquisition, it didn't make any sense to the Open Space Board to go ahead and issue debt, especially since internally we're borrowing from the general fund at the rate that it is earning on its outside investments, which currently is, with interest rates so low, we're guessing is maybe 1% is what we're earning for the year. So had we issued 30-year bonds, we would have been paying more like 5%, closer to 5% on that. So at the time, actually, we figured the difference in interest rate costs through June would have been about $140,000 more had we issued bonds in, say, February of this year. And we're paying, actually, I think we used 4.75% for what we thought we could issue the bonds at. So that difference between paying 4.75% versus 1% would have cost us $140,000 more out of the open space fund. So if you look to the end of the year on the cash flow, it shows that the ending cash balance we're projecting is about $125,000. But what we put in the cash flow is everything that's budgeted for this year, all the trail projects, all the maintenance, the operations and overhead for the fund. So that says that, we can pay for everything that's budgeted this year, but we really have no money available for acquisitions. So if an acquisition does come up, depending on its size, you could either borrow again from the general fund, basically against next year's revenue, sort of the way we did this year, or if it's really significant enough, we could decide to issue bonds at that time and fund it that way.
And the third option being we can negotiate to 2/12 closings in the way we're structuring our agreement.
Postpone your acquisition until next year.
Oh, thanks for that recap, Tom. Rachel,
Yeah,
questions?
I support this direction. I just want to maintain the flexibility for future opportunities. And by way of background, what is the bonding capacity that we have voter approval for already?
We have about 23 million remaining
Okay.
in voter authorization, and in December, you authorized issuing up to $10 million of that, and that authorization is good for a year. So without, other than checking in with you and saying, should we go ahead and do it, we'd be ready to move without further action on your part.
Yeah. Well, again, I support saving unnecessary interest payments, but I do not want to foreclose opportunities if other key parcels we've looked at or you guys have worked at start suddenly to firm up. And, we don't want to walk away from something because we were able to do Drosty. But, again, I, in general, support the direction.
Can I just jump on that? We have a very healthy acquisition docket going on, and although we didn't have anything that was imminent that was likely to produce a contract we would bring to you in the next month or two, that's the reason we didn't go into an executive session to give you a review, but I don't want anyone to have the impression that there isn't a lot going on. We've got landowner discussions going on all over the place. So we do have that sort of agile capacity that we've always had. We're trying to be frugal at the same time.
Appreciate it.
George?
I have sort of a broader question based on Dale's comments. With Drosty, we were intricately involved in that whole process, and I thought that was good, because I think that's the way that the Open Space and Trails Board was set up in terms of as an advisory to the BOCC for final approvals. And I just want to make sure that the Open Space and Trails doesn't get ahead of itself in terms of committing, in terms of a contract, before it's able to really have the opportunity for the BOCC to really understand all the implications and things like that. I thought again, Drosty worked really well. We were all very, very informed. We were all very, very involved. We were all on the same page. And so we were not, it was not a situation where Dale had already got an agreement with the landowner to do an acquisition, and you just come in for the BOCC just pretty much for a rubber stamp.
And I appreciate that, George. We work hard not to create those kinds of dynamics, and if the commissioners would like, I'm happy to come to one of your executive sessions and let you know about everything that every landowner discussion we're doing. But since there was nothing imminent, it takes some time to go all the way through the potentials that we're working with now. So.
Yeah, I would like to take you up on that, and that we identify a time that we can do that, and maybe not in depth, but at least topical, understanding, because we are aware of multiple things in previous exec session agendas that we actually never got to. So, it's timely. That would be good. Yeah, I absolutely support this direction, given the one most important thing is the bond market is not where we were kind of hoping it would be, and so you never spend when you don't have to. Certainly, I would retain the flexibility Rachel talked about, and something really hot comes before us, let's get to it. Lastly, I don't think it's that bad of an idea to catch our breath and, keep the hand in the fire, as it were, but also really work out these management plans. And, that's going to take a lot of energy by the board and staff. And, we won't diminish the importance of acquisitions, but I find this kind of a good thing.
Rob, some comments?
Yeah, I like the plan of not bonding, because I think that's a scary thing to our public right now. But and I also support, as Jack said, keeping our hand in the fire if acquisitions do come up, looking at them. It seems to me there is a little transition of spending here in our time period with the inventory that we're now accumulating, especially with inventory that's going to require, such as the Drosty project, some pretty large financial outputs. So we're switching a little bit towards management, it sounds like, as opposed to acquisitions. It'd be nice to get some feedback at some point on how that transition is happening, and what the long-term plans are for maintaining more and more inventory at the level that we want to maintain it. Large purchases like the Drosty not only have large purchase costs, but they also have large maintenance costs, and the fund is at a certain level, so the transition kind of shifts there a little bit. So at some point I'd like a presentation or feedback on what that transition means to how Open Space and Trails operates as a board and an organization.
Well,
Yeah, I'd like to answer that, and in part, Robert, something that the Open Space Board has been cognizant of for quite a while, that as the program matures, as the inventory of property builds, we end up with larger management responsibilities. And I have to say that with the County Commissioner's approval of our last board retreat's long-range planning, we came forward and were one of the only departments, and you stop me if I'm wrong here, in the county that actually increased our personnel. And we did that in part to meet this responsibility. But certainly watching the shift from full acquisitions to trail construction, increasing maintenance of previously created trails, and then the management responsibilities as we get these wonderful parcels that need it. It's a part of the natural progression and maturation of the program. So it's not something that is a surprise to the program. It's sort of a well-expected maturation of it. And in a large part, we had a request for 2 additional staff members that we were not didn't bring on board this year. That request is sort of still out there, and together with the county commissioners, we staggered that increase in personnel. So that request is still being out there. We expect to ramp the project up again, and that's more on the management side. But that said, Dale's previous point of an active acquisitions agenda, there's still parcels out there that are of interest and valuable, worthy candidates for acquisition. So we're still looking at that.
Rachel,
Yeah, perhaps by way of a closing comment, we do meet quarterly, and perhaps at our next quarterly meeting, we can review kind of your 10-year pro forma outline and see which dollars are towards management, which are potentially available for acquisition. We've done that in the past, but it would be a good time to do that again. And I think as Dale had said, he would make himself available for the projects that are still kind of simmering somewhere in the background. And, we don't necessarily have to wait for that next quarterly meeting to have a refresher on those, but we could also do that at the same time.
Good point, Dale. Do you want to comment on that?
Sure. Just another footnote about this, the management component of the program. It's interesting, the original charter that was enacted by the voters to go with the program provided that we would spend up to 10% on maintenance and was it 70% on open space acquisition and 20% on trails. That charter provision also gives the two boards the discretion to shift those pots around up to 10% in any direction. But we do have on our radar the identified need to talk about taking the maintenance pot and eliminating the sunset provision on it at some point. Currently, we're in an authorization that lasts until 2020 with this allocation that's set up in the charter, and I would think that sometime in the next 4 to 6 years we'll be contemplating a question to really look at what the long-range stewardship needs are of this wonderful asset inventory that the county now owns.
Well, responding back to Rachel's question, we don't have an executive session update scheduled for today, but I think our board would be entertained you do an update to the BOCC so we don't wait another 90 days.
Sure.
As to what's going on, because things do come up and money comes and goes and demands come and go. So I think we'd like to ask Dale to schedule a meet with you on that.
I think that would be great, and then when we do meet again quarterly, we'll already have some backgrounding, and then we can see what's become more to the forefront.
I'd like to definitely take up Rachel's suggestion that we actually have, and it might not be the next quarter, according to timing and planning, follow through with Rachel's idea and Rob's, look at, kind of how that's going to play long term, because the face of this program is likely to change when we have so much management to do per even what you said, future ballot question.
And I just add to that we don't want to ignore our responsibility of the stewardship of the land at the highest level with allocating the dollars to acquisitions as opposed to management.
Yeah.
We have little critters and wildlife and plants to take care of.
Yeah, so we have interesting dynamic.
And big critters.
So there's a dynamic between the allocations for our charter, acquisition, management, and trails. So, and as you dial back 20 years ago when all this was put together, the magnitude of what we have now, I don't think was really fully anticipated. But we did know that we had to be revisiting it as the landscape changes.
Let me ask a question.
Yeah.
I think lunch has been delivered. Maybe we should break and everyone grab lunch really quickly and come back to finish the agenda.
Okay, why don't we take, if the board's okay with that, we'll break and come back and talk about the Emma Powderhouse grant update. So we'll try to reconvene, bringing lunch to the table.
Yeah, we'll eat.
We're going to reconvene in 5 or 6
Yeah,
minutes.
I only ask because we only have a 15-minute break between the rest of our afternoon.
6:45 adjourned.
Mark, can you close the door to the kitchen window? Thank you.
And using our working lunch time, Gary, can you give us an update on the Powerhouse, Emma Powerhouse grant application purposes and timeline, et cetera?
Well, as you all know, we were extremely successful with the restoration of the general store buildings. It was, we did it under budget, we did it in time, and when we had our last meeting with the State Historic Fund, basically the State Historic Fund saw the powerhouse sitting there in the state that it's in and goes, well, why didn't you include it with the overall general storage? And at the time, we had an estimate that the general storage was going to cost more than they actually did, and we didn't see a history of the state funding that large of projects. So we've never really done that before, so we started with just the two main buildings, and then when she said that, we were like, oh good, you'll see it, we'll come back. If everyone wants to go, we're going to try, because basically the powerhouse, what we have done is stabilize it. You can see a lot of stabilization wood in there. We put a rolled roof on top, just to rolled asphalt, just to keep the water from coming in. But that building, basically we're at a point where we have to make a decision. It's at a point where it's stabilized for the next couple years, maybe 3 years, but the bricks are still coming down. The roof is in horrible shape. The cupola on top, which is really the interesting architectural part of this whole thing, that is in danger of potentially falling off. And so we're at a point where we need to make a decision. And the decision is, if we're going to restore it, we might as well go for a State Historic Fund grant and recoup a lot of the money that this would cost. And, the reality is when you look at the numbers, it looks expensive compared to like the overall cost for the main buildings, but these buildings are in really poor shape. The picture that we included didn't show the other side, which is missing most of the whole wall. There's a ton of masonry work here. Plus, to actually stabilize this building and make it useful is that we have to use stabilization techniques, basically use members that are right on the corners of the buildings, and so they hold up that whole building without a lot of internal structure, because these are really narrow buildings, but they're two-floor buildings, and you can actually have a lot of space in there to do things if you pull it back and do that type of structural interior. So that's why the cost is there. We are actually always conservative on this cost, and we're hoping that we get better costs, but we can't guarantee that. And so we're right now let's make a decision on going for it, restoring these buildings, and then we can really choose to say, what are we going to do with these in the future? Because this building kind of like, if it's there, you can do one thing with it, and if it's not there, you can do other things. So we need to make a decision if we're going to protect it, and staff recommends that we go for the grant to protect it.
More comments? Well, just for the open space, for the county commissioners' information, our open space board, we recommended that the county spend out of its open space and trails fund the $46,000 requested to match and lever the approximately $93,000 coming out of the state to protect the building. So that's where we are. Questions?
Well, as a comment, I support the request. To me, the compound of buildings is incredibly important, the integrity of maintaining the site as a whole. And, our board made a decision a couple years ago, maybe a little bit before your time, George, or right around that, I'm not sure, memory gets a little foggy, not to use an historic TDR from the house in order to help fund these things, which any private landowner would have been able to do. They would have been able to designate the house historic, receive a TDR, sell that, and use those funds for the restoration work. And our feeling was that the open space fund, as it purchased properties, was to extinguish growth, not to move growth to another area. So that was a strategic and principled decision that this board made, but it then eliminated the types of funds that we could have used for local match for continuing this project going forward. So I think that as the entrance to Pickens County on the Highway 82 side, and to show our respect for the historic character of our community in the agricultural areas and all the other work that's gone on in Emma as a whole, that this is really, you know, it would diminish the house and the main store tremendously. Just even the idea of a powder house, that this is where you had to keep the black powder, you know, to make sure it didn't blow up the main store if there was ever an accident. That tells a story for our community. That's the type of authenticity that really makes the resort and the county attractive in my mind. So I'm very supportive of that. The one thing I really would request, though, is that you guys get some good pictures this summer of the river areas and the riparian zone and the view of the parcel from the other side. Because I know, I think I've seen one once, but a lot of the public still thinks of the Emma open space purchase as being those buildings, because it's a major visual point of focus. And yet, you know, for my understanding of it, an awful lot of the interest was because of the beaver ponds, the river frontage, half-mile stretch along that section. And so I just want to have that ability to emphasize that as much as we're emphasizing the powder house going forward.
Good point, George.
Yeah, I'm just really excited that the State Historical Society has shown an interest to pursue continuing to upgrade and maintain and restore these buildings. And it's, I think, probably from their point of view, this is such a highly visible project for them to be involved in, right off of, you know, the busiest rural highway in the state. That I'm sure they recognize that, and it's great to have them as partners.
Well, we certainly proved our mettle with the more difficult part. And I agree, George, we're quite pleased that they essentially solicited our continuing request to finish this job down there.
Michael?
Gary, what is the history of the powder house? Do we have it?
The history we've been able to piece together is, as Rachel stated it, that according to the sources we've looked at, the main store buildings were built in 1898 as a general mercantile, and they built this little building out back, probably for myriad uses, but we're told that's where they stored black powder. You can imagine the valley in 1898, there was a lot of mining still going on, and as well as construction that still required some sort of crude ways of moving earth around. So there was, and people's firearms. They all needed black powder, and we're told this is where the outlet for that was, in the Mid-Valley. Emma was one of two post offices that were created almost immediately after the Ute were expatriated from this area. The Emma post office, I believe, was created by the federal government in about 1880. And for the early history of the valley, Emma and Setang were the two first centers. They were rail stops, and that's where people would come in from the hinterland to get their wares. I've heard stories from, for example, Reno Cerise, that his family used to own this, and they would load their cows on the train right there, and they'd get in the caboose with the cows and ride down to the stockyards in Denver and get out of the caboose and then count them as they were coming out to make sure they got paid. Well, we're still soliciting photographs and history of the site, and I don't feel that we have a complete picture of all the things that went on there. That's what we know.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Rob? I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Jack.
I reversed the sequence. I just want to see if Jack is still paying attention.
Just didn't want I appreciate the historic value of this, and it is a great entranceway into Pickens County. It's a building that I've always appreciated ever since I moved here. I'll probably make some more conservative comments, too. That the comment was made that we should fix it and then look towards what the long-term plan and usage of it is. I kind of feel the horse and the cart should be switched on that. We should figure out what our long-term plans and usages of it is, and then put money towards fixing it. Having, in these times, too much of a sinkhole for financially for some of these buildings scares me a little bit. I do think that it should be maintained, and there are going to be matching funds needed to these grants as well. How much money are we putting towards this when we're cutting a lot of other things in our county? So I'm a little concerned about the amount of money that's going into this project. I do agree with Rachel's comments that the riverfront property and the extended open space that we got with this purchase is fabulous. I just hope that we can find a use for this, that this doesn't become another Given Institute where, $200,000 a year, $300,000 a year makes it non-viable for our community and not in the best interest of our community.
Darrell, do you want to give Rob an update on that?
Well, that's an important point, and just to remind everyone how this came about, Open Space bought this property really on the eve of the demolition of the big buildings. There was a sign that I've kept, I have it, that said bricks for sale, and that was nailed on the side of the building by the prior owner. It's not the customary kind of open space project, and there is a feature to the way we did this that bears remembering, and that's that the open space charter allows the county to reserve the right to resell an open space asset if that reservation is put in the ordinance when the purchase is first authorized. And that was done here. So the notion with this financing of this restoration has been that this is an asset that, although the full parcel was 12 acres, there's approximately 1 acre that encompasses these historic buildings. The county has reserved the right to resell that, and the understanding that we worked out with the county attorney is that the open space fund is authorized to invest in an asset that it could potentially sell to recoup the investment, or to invest in an asset that we might ultimately use for some sort of open space facility. So that's the justification for putting those funds in. But you're right in pointing this out. There is yet to be determined, and that as far as the special funds of the open space dollars, really at the end of the day, one of those two outcomes is going to be needed. We're either going to need to find a new owner for this, or we're going to need to be able to utilize it ourselves.
And to be clear, too, at this point, we're really just talking about stabilization of the asset. It's not rehabilitation or retrofitting for new use. It's just making sure it doesn't fall down and is available for those sort of things in the future. So,
Right. We believe the shell of the big buildings is probably good for, 50 years without significant maintenance, and the interior can be reprogrammed for virtually anything. There's no infrastructure in it.
Jack, we bypassed you.
Yeah, it seems like there might be a fund in the state of Colorado that we might have access to. Meaning this fund, when we started, I was very pessimistic. Performance really helps turn that around, and staff and everyone that's worked on this, to contractors, et cetera, and our superstar grant writer has really done fabulous for us. And so I'm supportive of this because it might be one of the last times we have access to any funds, quite frankly. When we look at CCI, every single fund is being hit and at least proposed in legislation to preserve this fund because the gambling or the severance tax, those communities are at risk, and so there's going to be a bill that's in process. I think this makes a lot of sense. Now, clarification, is it not only structural, is the cupola going to be reworked so it's, whole, as it were?
Right. We're talking about creating a weather-tight shell that has a historic appearance, but with virtually no interior.
Yeah, and I have to The thing that totally allows me to go here is the fact that we were under budget, and, though monies can carry on without a name, this seems like we can fit this in the same context, so hats off to everyone that got that done, and move forward is my recommendation.
Coming back to the project, Gary, you just give us a quick timeline. What do you think will happen in terms of grant requesting and perhaps work either this summer or whatever?
Well, it'll be like the last one, where we submit the grant on April 1st, and then you wait to hear from the State Historic Fund if you get it. I think we heard in August or September that we actually received the funds, and then you have to go through a contract with the State Historical Fund. You have to create a contract with them to actually spend those funds, and that could take anywhere from 3 to 7, 8 months. It depends on the details of the contract, getting all the signatures and everything else on it. But so as soon as that contract is signed and finished, is when you can officially start spending money. We can actually do an RFP, request for proposals, before, if we know that we received the funding and everyone's okay with going for it, we could do a request for proposals, so we're ready to go as soon as that contract is signed. That's what we did last time. And last time, basically, we started in the end of March, beginning of April, and we're finished in September. So this would be a little quicker, smaller, so, hopefully we'd have it done by early summer to midsummer of next year.
But you don't fear on your part that it will collapse into a pile of bricks between now
There's
and...
always fear, but there's always fear, but we got through, we got through this winter. Putting the rolled roofing up there was critical to really, our biggest problem was there was a ton of moisture getting in, and it was really saturating the main joists that were holding off that roof. And now that they've dried out a little bit, with all the other stabilization there's still going to be bricks that fall off, and there's still going to be potential for it to come down, but, it's stabilized, hopefully, through until we can get this started.
All right, so we have about 7 minutes for staff comments and board open discussion. Staff have any other comments?
Probably the boards ought to share whatever other things.
What about the bridge? Did we do the bridge already?
The Woody Creek the Woody Creek Bridge.
Well, we can report on that quickly. I don't know if that's an item the commissioners want to get into in detail, but essentially what the Open Space Board directed this morning was for us to take the austere approach to this and proceed with this project. We want to thank the county and the city of Aspen for providing these CMAQ funds for this trail enhancement. Of course, once the Rio Grande Trail was completed, Emma down to Glenwood Springs, it increased the pressure back on us to extend the paved surface on into Aspen, since we now have this valley-wide connection that where the pavement starts in Woody Creek and goes to Glenwood. So this bridge is one of the missing pieces of the phase of the trail between Woody Creek and W/J. With the direction we got from the Open Space Board this morning, unless there's other comments from the commissioners, staff are going to get busy and finalize our design. We do have review from CDOT because of the CMAQ funding, but we want to get this trail done this season.
John?
Two things, and hopefully the brief version. Why is it necessary? Because, and you do say you've decided to do this to avoid the hazard of paving the existing route over the culvert, which would become dangerous due to grades and curvatures. Explain what that is.
Okay. We've had other locations on the Rio Grande Trail that we've since repaired where you essentially have what racers would call a corkscrew, where you got to make a turn, go down a hill, come back around and up.
So this straightens it out.
This straightens it out. Having the trail the way it is with a soft surface was acceptable, but based on experience in other locations, we were convinced if we paved it, it was going to become another collarbone threat.
Okay, so I can understand that, if you wouldn't mind, Gary. due to timing. Okay, so I think I'm on board with the bridge. I can understand, you want your improvements and your enhancements to be compatible with ongoing use. Why 14 feet, though? Why do we need a piston buoy in there? I don't personally think we should have piston bullies and track setting on this trail because of wildlife. And have you asked the Division of Wildlife about this?
Well, the interaction with the Nordic Council is a big topic that's sort of the tip of that iceberg. But the Nordic Council did adopt their master plan here a couple of years ago, and since then we have been setting track down the Rio Grande when the conditions warrant. I was not aware of any DOW concerns that were raised about that. But setting aside that item for a moment, the question of the piston buoy is simply that they need the 14 feet to continue on across this bridge. Without that, we were looking at the problem of having to drive the piston buoy down one side of the abutment, down to Woody Creek Road, cross over the culvert, and come back up. We would have had to create kind of a messy-looking trail to get that around this gap.
I'd love to know about the DOW, and then that might allay my concerns.
We had to go through site plan review for the trail, and when we went through site plan review, the Division of Wildlife wasn't as concerned about the existing Rio Grande Trail as they were about the soft surface trail up above that we're creating, because the Rio Grande Trail through Woody Creek comes on a cut that's significantly removed from the upper benches of where the wildlife really use it. So they were concerned about those upper benches, and we were proposing a trail on the upper benches.
The soft surface
trail. So they didn't want the cross-country skiing potentially up there. And so, we are proposing only to have the cross-country skiing on the main Rio Grande Trail, and then we're not making the surface up above wide enough to really accommodate the cross-country skiing. So, on any section we go through, we do get a Division of Wildlife recommendation on it, so.
Good, thank you. Any other board comments?
Well, only that I think I read via email Woody Creek Caucus concerns about having a prefab versus custom bridge and the size of the bridge, and I'm just wanting to make sure we're really working with the neighborhood on that eventual bridge design.
Gary's had several interactions with the caucus.
Their concern was kind of twofold. They were interested in seeing whether we could build this bridge locally, and that was one of the reasons they were interested in a custom bridge. We've essentially determined that local construction of this is not likely. The nearest location that could potentially build an engineered bridge of this span is in Grand Junction, and even there, with the CDOT involvement, we can't have a local preference in our bidding, so we wouldn't be able to guarantee it would even be made in Colorado. Now, the aesthetics of bridges, we had a nice round on that question with just the Open Space Board, and at least my staff recommendation is that the type of bridge that we're proposing to use here, if we go with the prefab, is visually very similar to what the city of Aspen used to cross the Roaring Fork River down here at Stein Park. It's what we used up at Brush Creek at the request of Snowmass Village, and we recently used 2 of these on the Crystal River Trail. So they're kind of a standard, they're well accepted, but I know that when we start talking about bridge aesthetics, you get as many opinions as you have folks in the room.
Thank you.
So you can be assured half of the public will like it, and
Half will not. Actually, 3/4 will like it and 3/4 won't.
exactly.
And when it's done, no one will notice.
Exactly. Well, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that update.
So, if no other board comments, Foz?
No, I was thinking maybe
Your last chance ever.
Yeah, give us some insight.
Both barrels. Both barrels front.
both barrels. I don't even have anything in the chamber.
All right, I think we're on pass.
And I'll wrap up the meeting with, again, a wonderful, huge...
Jack has one final
Okay.
comment. We're scheduled for a
Yeah,
15-minute break.
we didn't have on the agenda any BOCC feedback, networking, whatever, on the leash law issue. I mean, the change in the leash law. And I don't know, is that, what is the timing, Dale? When is this maybe going to get to us? Because ultimately, and I checked with John Ely, this is going to be our purview, your recommendation. And we certainly would like that in a timely manner, so we kind of settle this and I think hopefully put it back, behind us.
Right, Jack's correct that the Open Space Board had heard from some constituents who were interested in changing the county code as regards leashes, and we've made a couple of reports to the Open Space Board. They sent the staff back out to look into a couple of details on that, and we're planning to report back at the next regular Open Space meeting on April 7th. It's been my recommendation to leave the leash law alone, but depending on how that meeting goes, we may or may not bring forward a proposal to the commissioners to modify the county code.
So the first step is to get your hands around all the rest of the process and information, and then make a recommendation as to the status of where to go. Good. Well, I appreciate that. I look forward to being here if that comes to us, because I am not a supporter, and I can't support it, and won't support it, period.
Is that your final word on that, Jack?
No, because if it comes to us, we'll have reasons.
So we do have that plan, we did have that plan for April 7th, and we'll have a full board
Thank you.
by that time. So, George?
On that April 7th meeting, are you also going to be discussing the use of motorized vehicles on the Rio Grande? I know
Motorized
RAPTA
bikes?
has gotten a memo in terms of some new legislation and trying to determine how they can word that to, and what the policy will be.
Right. What George is referring to, so that everyone understands, there was a federal rule that was released that took us a little bit off guard. It has to do with Americans with disabilities and the federal statute on that. And there's been a great deal of uncertainty about whether that means that the trails are now open to motorized use of equipment that disabled people may or may claim they need to use on the trails. And what we've done is an interim assessment of our trails. And maybe Gary and Lindsay could comment on the detail of what we're doing. We did coordinate with RAFTA. I think that the subject is somewhat unsettled at the moment, but I'm hoping within the next few months we can kind of gain some clarity on what the expectations were with that federal regulation.
Just if I can interrupt, because there were two issues. One was the federal regulation, and the other issue was just allowing motorized vehicles via the
E-bikes.
the e-bikes.
We're going to combine, basically we're combining those two issues, because the Department of Justice ruling really will facilitate our discussion of that. And so when we come back with the recommendations on that, that'll be included with everything.
I'd like to make a comment on that. At our last joint meeting with the City of Aspen Open Space, it was clear that they were completely following Pitkin County staff, particularly Lindsay's take on this. Her interpretation of it, study of it, was so completely up to speed that she basically set the response for both the City of Aspen and Pitkin County with checking in with John Ely and the legal team. It was pretty impressive, and it's one of the reasons that having great staff really makes a huge difference. The analysis of not only the Justice Department ruling, but also all of our trails, we feel really confident that we're in good hands and ahead of the game on this issue, not only for Pitkin County, but also informing RAFTA and other municipalities across the state. It's pretty impressive.
But having said that, Lindsay's going to need to review that with us at the April 7th meeting.
It's a work in progress, but I'm hugely confident we have it well in hand. And as Dale said, it was somewhat of a surprise coming at us with this very vague language out of the Justice Department. And it does bring in the e-bike issue as well as every other motorized vehicle on the planet, as near as we can tell.
Lindsay, you want to kind of fill in the gaps there?
Sure. So we did an inventory of our existing trail systems, and there's a map on our website of our draft, other power-driven mobility device recommended regulations per trail. But now we can go back and revise that, and we've been working with the city of Aspen, but we also need to kind of coordinate with Snowmass and Basalt and Carbondale to the extent where all our trails touch, and then also work out some things with our attorneys. And then eventually we need to update our 12 code. So that's kind of where we are. So as far as having it fully updated by April 7th, I'm not sure that that will be reached, but it's definitely in progress.
So it's a high priority. It's a classic case of a zinger coming in from left field that's going to consume a lot of staff time, not only Lindsay's, but board and municipalities up and down the valley to try to get clarity on this thing, and probably will not be very clear until we work our way through it. So with that, I would...
And is RAFTA working as a partner because it's such a contiguous nature of, you know...
all the owners, users on the Rio Grande corridor. And so to close out the meeting again, from the, well, we don't have a plaque for Franz today, or the titanium watch, or the carabiner for you.
A knockout.
What about a fishing rod?
But we do have some money for you. Again, thanks for your 5 years of inexhaustible time. Well, let's have a motion to adjourn the meeting. Moved.
Second.
Meeting adjourned.
Okay, and we will reconvene here probably just a couple minutes after 1 o'clock so that we have a 10-minute break.
Didn't have it done.
I got to run quick in. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Rob.
If you didn't have it done.
And the presentation has to end promptly at 2. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I think Rob will be back in the room in a second. And is...
The co-pilot is available.
I am moving away from the PowerPoint here. But Grassroots, are you ready? Okay. You are tuned into the Pickens County Board of County Commissioners meeting for Tuesday, March 22nd. We are now going to hear an update on the Roaring Fork Valley Watershed Plan. Mark Fuller, just introduce yourself and take it away.
Thank you, Rachel. My name is Mark Fuller. I'm the director of the Root Eye Water and Power Authority. As you probably know, the Root Eye Water and Power Authority, in cooperation with the Roaring Fork Conservancy, has been working on the Roaring Fork Watershed Plan going on 6 years now. And I'm accompanied today by Rick LaFaro, the director of the Roaring Fork Conservancy. The Conservancy has acted as the authority's principal contractor on the plan. So they've been doing pretty much all of the legwork, and the authority has been providing oversight and guidance and funding. And we are now at the point where we've got a draft watershed plan. I've got a copy of it with me, but I'm going to leave with you guys today. And we're in the process of taking this draft around to local elected officials and other agencies, interested agencies, and briefing them on the contents of the plan and the process from here on out. So what I'd like to do today is to recap a little bit how we got to this point and walk you through some of the highlights of the plan, talk a little bit about implementation, and hopefully have a few minutes to answer questions and get your comments on it. So with that, I'll go back to our slideshow here. The purpose of the watershed plan is to plan for and work toward an environmentally and economically healthy watershed that benefit all who have a stake in it. The watershed plan, as I said, has been in the works for 6 years now. It started with the Roaring Fork Watershed Collaborative that established a water committee back in 2005. That committee sort of laid the groundwork for the plan and then turned it over to the Root Eye Water and Power Authority when it became clear that some organized entity was going to have to take the lead in funding the actual work. So the Water and Power Authority since then has raised about $200,000 in funding, most of it from local entities, members of the authority, and including $80,000 in grants from the Colorado Water Conservation Board. The benefits of the watershed plan are pretty evident, but it's worthwhile to go through them one more time. It provides a structure for input and dialogue between the stakeholders, improves understanding and leadership in watershed issues, encourages partnerships to identify and fund projects, makes efficient use of financial resources, provides guidance for protecting water resources, shares information to preclude duplication, and facilitates collaboration on public outreach and education. And we found that all of these benefits are not only benefits of the plan, but they're also benefits of the planning process. In the course of putting this plan together, and phase one, you'll remember, was the State of the Watershed report that came out in 2008. In the course of this, we've probably had, I don't know, maybe 36 different public meetings of one kind or another. We've talked to literally hundreds of people up and down the valley who are both stakeholders and just interested citizens. So I think we've had a very beneficial effect in terms of raising sort of the collective IQ of the community about water issues and raising awareness of what some of the critical water issues in the valley are and what they will be in the future. This slide is an example of what the narrative of the plan looks like. The plan itself is divided into 5 different sections which address groundwater, surface water, riparian and in-stream water quality, and regional water management. And this is an example of the narrative that addresses groundwater management. Each section has a set of recommended actions. It's then broken down into goals, and each goal is broken down further into objectives, and each objective is broken down further into actions. And each action has a coordinating entity identified and key participants identified. So it gets into a great deal of detail about what should be done and who should be doing it. And then each action is sometimes, not always, but sometimes broken down into sub-actions. So there are many different layers to this, and between one section and another, it covers a vast area. There are 200 total recommended actions in these 5 different categories. And then in the narrative, you'll see the call-out box like the one in the lower right that provides a little bit more detail that isn't covered elsewhere in the narrative, background information or further detail on a specific topic. And then supplementing the narrative, we have these matrices. The matrices are attempts to provide different avenues into the recommended actions. So the recommended actions in the matrices are not different than in the narrative, they're just differently formatted so that you can look at them through different perspectives. So for instance, this particular matrix addresses priorities of recommended actions. The yellow is a high priority, the orange is a medium priority, and then there's a red that we'll see in a minute here that are the high priority projects. And these are arranged according to geographic area. So you can see across the top there, they're broken down by watersheds and subwatersheds. And these are available in Excel format so that you can sort them any way you want to. So for instance, if you wanted to go to the matrix and look at all of the recommended actions that applied to, say, the upper crystal, you could sort according to the upper crystal and it would call out just those recommended actions. By the same token, if you just wanted to look at recommended actions that addressed high priority, you could sort according to that. You could sort according to which entity was identified as the coordinating entity for that particular action. So the matrices give us a lot of opportunities to kind of break down the recommended actions into bite-sized chunks, if you will, and look at them according to what your particular interest happens to be. As another example, this matrix breaks down the recommendations according to coordinating entities. So if you look across the top there, there's Aspen Center for Environmental Studies, Aspen Global Change, Colorado Trout Unlimited, U.S. Forest Service, et cetera, et cetera. We weren't totally exhaustive in this listing. We could have run this list out, several pages long if we'd wanted to, but here, I got it. I guess that's as sharp as it gets. But in any case, again, you can sort this according to whatever interest you have. You'll notice that right in the middle there, the purple line, is local jurisdictions. And local jurisdictions we probably identify as the coordinating entity for 3/4 of these recommendations. We did not break down local jurisdictions into specific jurisdictions, so we kind of lumped cities, counties, et cetera, all together. And obviously, some will be more applicable in one jurisdiction or another, but again, we wanted to try and keep this to one page, so we didn't do that. We didn't go through that exercise in this particular matrix. This matrix looks at priorities, And again, these just show the urgent projects as number ones and with the red color coding. They're all identified with local jurisdictions, and I'll talk about these particular recommendations a little bit more in a minute. But we have three different matrices. The first one, as I showed you earlier, breaks down the recommendations according to geographic area. The second one according to coordinating entities and other participating entities, and the third one according to priority. Just to talk a little bit more about the coordinating entities, the coordinating entities are ones that we saw as being critical to the successful implementation of a given recommended actions. We also identified other participating entities, and those, in our judgment, were other entities that had an interest or had some jurisdiction over a given recommended action. And we recognize that those are subject to change. But what they do is they give you an idea as to what kind of partnerships we need to be looking at. So, for instance, if a local jurisdiction is identified as a coordinating entity, that means that they should appropriately be taking the lead on an action. But if we've got participating entities identified as, say, CDOT and the Forest Service and the State Engineer's Office, then again, you've got a starting point for the other parties that need to be brought into discussion of that particular action. Urgent actions. In going through this, it was clear that we needed to put some items at the top of the list here. When we were going through and assigning priorities, the first cut, everything was a priority. But we went back through it over a number of sessions and got to the point where we identified these criteria as being ones that we could use to separate out particularly urgent projects. The ability to be successfully completed, economic and environmental value, threats of future impacts, watershed-wide benefits, opportunities for collaboration and education, and opportunistic, that is, that they had some public relations value and had political support. So using those criteria, we narrowed down the urgent actions to these, and the white ones are kind of the ones that are the first among equals here in the list of urgent actions. Under regional water management, create a unified voice for regional water management. And that gets to some of the discussions we've been having about implementation and whether or not the current sort of organizational structure in the valley is sufficient to actually implement this plan successfully. Under surface water, pursue a water conservation campaign that benefits the river. Under groundwater, didn't have a super urgent action, but one was to ensure that adequate groundwater supply for new land uses and development. Under water quality, on-site wastewater treatment system education campaign. That goes to educating people about septic systems and their potential impact on water quality. Under riparian and in-stream areas, plan and implement key riparian in-stream protection and restoration projects, and increase awareness of the importance of riparian areas.
Can I ask one question? When you use the term regional, I'm wondering, are you talking about regional in the sense of our watershed?
No.
Or regional in the sense of the diversions and the larger water playing field, as it were?
The latter.
Okay.
We're really talking about the state, or at the very least, the Colorado watershed.
Thank you.
To talk about these a little bit more, in water conservation, what we have in mind there are a number of projects. One is this options and recommendations for the Roaring Fork watershed. That's a study that's actually currently underway under the auspices of the Roaring Fork Conservancy to look at what opportunities there are for water conservation throughout the valley. And the premise of all of these water conservation projects is to look at ways in which water conservation can benefit stream flows and riparian areas, as opposed to simply making it easier for the next junior water rights holder to take his full allocation of water. In other words, we want water conservation to perform a conservation interest rather than just another private interest. The Conserve to Enhance program is based on a program that's currently underway in Arizona, whereby if you use less water in a given month, you still pay the same amount that you did the previous month when you use more water, and the difference goes to a fund to supplement stream flows.
And it's a voluntary program.
Voluntary program, and the person that coordinated that in Arizona is actually coming to the next Watershed Collaborative meeting on April 7th to discuss that program in detail, and so we can think and talk about whether or not it has any applicability here. And then the Water Conservation Campaign is something that we're looking at in the future as a way of actually putting into action some of the recommendations that come from that initial report. Do you want to say anything more about that report?
I think the take-home message for everybody here, and I know most of you get this, but I think overall it's very important for this watershed to hit on a formula that works for water conservation, because while we constantly point the finger at the eastern slope is also pointing back at us and saying, well, if you're going to be critical of us, particularly with water use and water conservation, you sort of have to take care of things in your own house. And we hear the story all the time that it's not worth it for us to conserve, because if I conserve water, then it just makes it free for somebody else to take in the river. So it's something we're very committed to, because obviously it has real implications for benefiting the river, but it also has tremendous demonstration value to everybody else that we're practicing what we preach here.
I'll also say at this point that one of the things we're looking at in relation to this watershed plan is giving it kind of an identity of its own. That is, not necessarily identifying it with Roaring Fork Conservancy or the Rudai Water and Power Authority or any given political jurisdiction in the valley, but rather branding it, if you will, in a way that gives it some gives people a way to identify with watershed activities without carrying any baggage of any other entity. I think, we all know examples of that. RAFTA is probably the best one, where everybody knows what RAFTA is and what RAFTA means, and it's identified with its mission as opposed to any given jurisdiction. And I think we're striving to kind of establish that same kind of profile for the watershed plan over time. And this conservation campaign is one way that we look to do that. As some of you know, when we were working on this, we farmed out part of it, that is the implementation element, to a team of graduate students from the University of Michigan who spent most of last year putting together a implementation study. And they created a large book that includes a couple of dozen case studies from other watershed groups around the West. And they recommended a number of things regarding implementation locally. And one of them is that we sort of go with a fairly voluntary program, or at least as voluntary as we can make it, because that typically gets better cooperation than something that is a requirement and therefore stirs up controversy and ill feeling. But they didn't really identify a existing entity that could oversee that whole process. So some of our options are to continue to work through the Watershed Collaborative, which, as I said earlier, is an informal group without any real authority, to invest the Watershed Collaborative with some authority to organize it as a 501c3 or under some other premise. Another option would be for the Root Eye Water and Power Authority and the Roaring Fork Conservancy to formalize a partnership through a intergovernmental agreement or a memorandum of understanding or some other instrument that would invest us with long-term authority over the watershed plan, or to come up with some new organization. And nobody likes that idea very much. The feeling is that there are enough organizations already in place, and we ought to be able to work with what we've got in some respect. But our thought at this point is that the first step in all of this is to bring this to all of the elected officials in the valley, and at least get to the point where the local jurisdictions are prepared to endorse this plan and to adopt it as at least an advisory document. And with that in hand, we can then maybe start working over a longer term on how we manage implementation of this. We recognize on the one hand that implementation is going to be sort of a glacial process. It's going to be opportunistic. We're going to be doing things, taking actions as we can, when we can, where we can. But we also do want to pursue some of these high-profile, high-priority projects, and exactly how we go about doing that in a way that promotes partnership and allows us to fundraise and so forth is something that we're still working on, and we'd love to have whatever feedback you've got on that issue. This is just a kind of list of reasons that we want to formalize these commitments. We want to make sure that this plan, despite the fact that everybody's been supporting it very strongly for the last several years, we want to be sure that it's legitimate in the eyes of the public and in the eyes of local government officials. And we want to instill confidence in the collaborative process. We want it to guide our actions in the future in regard to water policy and water projects. And this last, using it to obtain grants, is really kind of full circle to one of the reasons that we started this process in the first place. The Conservancy, in fact, was going for an EPA grant, I believe, back in 2003, 2004, and were kind of disqualified from that process because there was no watershed plan in place for the Roaring Fork. So to some extent, we're looking to this plan as an avenue to resources that weren't available to us prior to this being in place, just because there are grants out there that are premised on the existence of a plan to guide the use of that grant money. Again, going back to implementation, these are just some of the thoughts that we've had while we've been talking about this. There are some examples out there of memorandums of understanding that are signed off on by local governments to establish watershed partnerships. I think this idea of pursuing an initial project is real important, particularly if it's something on the ground that people can see and identify as being a product of this planning process. We need to pursue various funding opportunities. One of the features of this plan is probably a 20-page section that just talks about funding resources that are out there, various grant programs, various government programs, private foundations, and all of them, I think, it's safe to say, are going to be much more receptive to funding requests if they know that the project that's being funded is something within the context of a larger plan that is supported by the entire community. So that's all I've got, and I welcome your questions.
Well, we'll switch the lights back on and see if anything rises to the surface for us all. Okay, Michael.
Mark, it's really extraordinary amount of work that's gone into this. It's really an outstanding document. There's really not enough words to say how good it is. Really extraordinary. Thank you.
Thank you.
The one thing that occurs to me, and has occurred to me before, is that we have a Healthy Rivers and Streams Board that's funded by a small percentage sales tax. And if the other jurisdictions within the valley, Eagle County and Garfield County, could be encouraged to have similar organizations, that would be the beginning of sort of a multi-jurisdictional, high-level area to begin cooperation and collaboration, because everybody would be funded, and to some degree, not even to, it doesn't have to be a large degree, but it would be, I think, useful to try to promote that. I've been very happy with our Healthy Rivers and Streams Board. And I think that the other jurisdictions need a similar source of funding to go ahead and do these projects. The other thing that occurs to me in terms of collaborative projects is that we have the town of BOCC beginning apparently a restoration through their core of their town. But at both extremes of the river there, Pickens County has ownership of land, public lands, and actually has some projects, the water park schedule, although it hasn't begun, but there's been a significant amount of planning. That if we had BOCC, Pickens County, and Eagle and various other entities, that'd be the greatest place to start the sort of opportunistic project that you talked about.
Yeah, I should say, we didn't have a slide about it, but one of the urgent projects, you remember, was riparian restoration. And we've looked at 3 different locations for that kind of project, and that's one of them. Between the upper and the lower bypass bridge, Roaring Fork through the Salt. The other 2 sites are, actually 3 sites. One is Coal Creek at the confluence with the Crystal. The other is North Star, and the other is Cattle Creek at the confluence with the Roaring Fork. And those are all projects that we'd like to pursue, again, in the interest of doing something fairly high profile, highly visible, where there's a lot of partnership opportunity. And I think of those, the one that you're talking about has probably got the best momentum behind it between the town and the county and the CDOT and various other people who are concerned about the river through that particular stretch.
Plus it has enormous high visibility. You know, it's sort of this riparian area mixed in with an urban area, with the tourist area, with a fishing area, with a kayaking area. It's really an extraordinary place.
George?
A couple of things. One, I'll echo Michael's comments in terms of the work you've done, and hopefully you'll have an executive summary on that thick package, like you did on the first initial watershed report, which was really helpful to have that exec summary, actually, without having to go into all the technical and the details.
Well, let me just respond to that quickly. We don't have an executive summary per se. One is in the works, but in the meantime, I would just say that the first 2 sections, which are the introduction and overview and the urgent actions, are really what would pass for an executive summary for the time being. This plan is available for downloading on the Conservancy's website at www.roaringfork.org. And I'm going to leave this copy here, but I would urge you to all look at it. But if you look at those first two sections, that's like 10, 11 pages. That'll get you all you need to know, and then you can pick and choose among the various detailed recommended actions as you like. So.
The other two other comments. You mentioned that, I thought you said that about 80% of the action items would need governmental either input or approvals. Is that correct? And then to follow that line of thought, you also referenced RAPTA as an example where everyone knows what RAPTA is and their goal. And I think one of the things that I've been very impressed with in my short term as an alternate on the RAPTA board is the makeup. Although it's made up of multi-jurisdictions up and down the valley, when you go to one of those meetings, you sit at the table, everyone has a single focus, a single goal in mind, and it's not parochial at all. And I think that is a really good model to use. And if we could bounce back off of one of Michael's ideas in terms of if the other counties were able to pass some sort of funding source, even if it's minimum, it starts to provide a structure to allow a group of elected officials to get together, meet regularly, have some dollars to work with, and have the ability to identify and work towards a common goal. And lastly, when you talk about funding opportunities, I think you're going to need to have some sort of structure or a 501c3 to be able to utilize it, whether it's a combination of you two guys or something else. I think that's going to be an important part of it as well.
Jack?
Yeah, a couple of things. On the practical side, in the preparation for this document, which, I'll third the positive comments, of course, starting with Cindy's initial work when it was really a small project to the total involvement of the region. So add me to that. As far as use, this Sunday, for example, in the Denver Post, in the perspective side, there was an article on the Sterling Ranch, this monster 10,000 new unincorporated city by Chatfield Reservoir. And they taught the developers, it was just a kind of a brief synopsis of what was going on. And on the development side, the developers are asserting that through very minimal use of water per household, they can make this work. And there was a number. Their goal was something like 0.33 acre-feet per household, a typical planning household. Do we have any analysis relative to our either metro water and sand or municipal systems here about actually what households on average use in each of those, we'll call them jurisdictions? Did you all investigate any of that?
Not as part of the plan, we didn't.
The classic rule of thumb has always been that 1 acre-foot is sufficient for 2 families in a year. But that is, again, a kind of high metric. And they are seeing uses as low as like 60 to 80 gallons a day in Australia under a time of drought. And I think the state average currently is around 140 gallons a day per family. And so, trying to look to bringing that down, not to jump in too long on your question, but this conservation piece that's mentioned is one of the 4 legs of the current IBCC report of portfolios of how to solve the problem. And I think they have a somewhat passive goal of people upgrading their fixtures over time and new building codes to come forward for new growth and so on and so forth. They are a little more limited on aggressive goals in terms of asking people to tear out some of the traditional bluegrass vegetation, go more to xeriscaping or things like that. But there really is a very strong push-pull right now with the Front Range and the West Slope saying, well, what are you guys willing to do for conservation? No, what are you guys willing to do for conservation? And, my fear, of course, is that we all look around 20 years from now and are starting to go heavy the way places like Arizona and Nevada have started to go because their supplies are diminished as opposed to building it in now. But it's a very tough argument to make to people. Real estate community perhaps is one of the strongest, and again, I'm talking maybe a little more Front Range than here per se, but where they're saying people won't buy our houses if they don't have a lush green front yard or the landscaping they expected when they left their home in Kentucky. And so the conservation element is one that many higher-up officials and others have been very hesitant to really touch. And so you do have some developers now coming in, and they're being forced to by the water supply shortage and the amount of money it takes to buy reliable supplies. And so they are proposing these sort of extremely efficient homes.
Well, and that leads to my question, basically, because it seems like, using that Sterling Ranch example, and Rachel filled us in, in the bigger picture, but we, on the western slope, and specific to this plan, this watershed, we're going to have to walk the talk. And that's something that's going to have to be kind of summarized, as you go for collaboration and education. We're going to have to hit this home universally here because, in my estimation, not speaking for anyone else, clearly our biggest threat is, the undefined climate change, so we'll leave that one aside. But literally, the challenge we face with Trans-Mountain diversions. So we're going to have to set an example, and, we've kind of generally, I won't say I'm certainly a water attorney, understand state law about water, but we're going to have to fight to keep every drop here, and that will be accomplished partially by our example. And that means, the old usual, hey, brushing your teeth and shaving, that's only where it starts. And one last, then an actual... okay, Mark, you alluded to using the document in maybe a future structure, however it is, and making the document advisory, and the other option is regulatory. How would that work? I mean, I'm not mechanically per se, but how would, for example, a jurisdiction as part of this collaboration use it as a regulatory? I can understand an advisory. How would this document be used? Because what I'm inferring, there are a bunch of action plans. So it would be regulatory within that jurisdiction, identifying the problem, but then the means.
Maybe that's a Cindy question.
Yeah, we've worked together a lot talking about all this, and I think that there's just one great example is that of the most urgent items that Mark pointed out, and one of them is all about on-site wastewater treatment system education, and not just to the professional community of pumpers and that community, but to the individuals who have septic systems. So that's a role we can play, which isn't necessarily regulatory, but on one hand it is, in the sense that we just passed a use permit provision where every time a property sells, we ensure that in fact it's been inspected and that we don't have leakage into waterways or into the system. So there's a combination there. So that's one example. But my assumption is that once the plan is given the nod by all the jurisdictions and everyone's on board, then we'll look at a work program throughout the county and how that work program fits in with all the different departments, and if you see that as a high priority, where we take that. And in the past, with our strategic planning under the environment, we've said water is a very high priority, and it's obvious in the citizenry passing the tax that it is, and we would want to ensure that we're marching along, implementing the plan. So I think I could pick out 10 items just on the first couple pages that we could go ahead and work on. So.
There are a couple of levels to this. On the one hand, it's important to us, and I think to the success of the plan, that it be adopted or endorsed in some formal way by every jurisdiction. Sort of the first draft resolution that I've drawn up endorses it as an advisory document that the county commits to using in the course of their water project and policy planning in the future. At the other end of the spectrum, it could be adopted as a master plan and go through your P&Z the same way any regional master plan is, which opens it up to all kinds of, potential examination. But that would also be fine. My own take on it is that it's not a one-size-fits-all process necessarily. And we want the various jurisdictions who adopt it to adopt it in a way that they're comfortable with. We don't want to go to Garfield County and say, this is the way Eagle County did it, therefore you need to do it too. The important thing is that everybody do it at some level, and that we can then continue to talk among ourselves and go to, say, funding entities, for instance, and say, and have a piece of paper that demonstrates it, that every jurisdiction in the valley has endorsed this plan, and every jurisdiction in the valley has made a commitment to acknowledge it and consider it in their future dealings having to do with water. That way, nobody gets straitjacketed by it, but at the same time, we acknowledge that we're all kind of rowing in the same direction.
Yeah, just real briefly. It seems like a very comprehensive plan. You alluded to in your presentation that everything seems urgent from the beginning, and really defining what's urgent and fine-tuning where the rubber meets the road within this plan, I think, is a crucial part of it. I'll also mention the Energy Smart program between the Garfields, Eagle, and Pitkin County. The first thing that they did when they did a home assessment of my house, even though energy doesn't really say water, but the first thing that they did was change out all my faucets to low-flow faucets. So they certainly have a focus on, the rubber meeting the road on that aspect with, $4.9 million over the next 3 years for those 3 municipalities.
And you meant Gunnison, not Garfield.
I'm sorry, Gunnison, yes, sorry.
Another GE county.
Yeah.
So Garfield isn't part of it?
No. Gunnison is.
Gunnison. So, and I also commend you for, including all those different resources of groups in your study, because that's important to get everybody working together. So, good work.
Well, I can't say better than anyone else what a great piece of work this is. Mark probably remembers I was part of the Aspen City Council and Root Eye Water and Power Authority when the discussion of a watershed plan came forward more formally, and I said, well, can't you just take those other studies we've done and let's have this done in 18 months? And everyone was very diplomatic and said, well, that is great to see the enthusiasm of the elected leadership, Rachel, but this is going to take longer than that. And it has been done very well, very comprehensively. So hats off to everyone involved. I just want to go over a couple things really quickly. One is that it's really easy for us to point back to the RAFTA example now, but the RAFTA example didn't fall into place very quickly. And in particular, other funding sources from other municipalities did not fall into place very quickly. We as Picken County and Aspen and Snowmass extended service down through Glenwood Springs for a long time before Glenwood Springs decided it wanted to create its own funding source for transit and to eventually pass that. And even the RTA, which has been a great advance, was probably close to 4 years in coming. And there was an initial effort by RAFTA that dissolved towards the end. It didn't have the momentum, it didn't have the buy-in. And then there were a lot of additional resources thrown at it from the city of Aspen in terms of hiring planning directors, augmenting RAFTA's budget, putting Alice Hubbard Laird specifically in RAFTA to be nothing but the RTA implementation director. And it was another 2-year process from then until we got to the point of a public vote in 2000 that took that forward. And so there was a lot of working out to do about who could afford what other people's existing sales tax structure was like, who used the most, who benefited the most, who already had their own transit plans. And, I mean, clearly, we don't even have the ports of Garfield County within the Roaring Fork Valley as formal members of RAFTA today. They're contributing out of their general fund, they're participating in transit, and they support it. But these things are an evolution. And I, for one, believe in that evolution, believe if we're on the right track, we'll get there, but I wouldn't want to withhold or hold back on any of these urgent implementation acts until we see Eagle County pass a new sales tax or Garfield County pass a new sales tax to start to work on these things. Some of this is policy. Some of this is about code changes and land use, and I agree with the approach of it being an advisory document for people to understand and start to look at the benefits to the streams and rivers that having these things be part of their land use code, whether it's setbacks from river development or non-removal of riparian vegetation within the certain buffer zone to the river, or various things like that. I think you just have to keep inching forward on so many different fronts. That adoption as a regulatory would be great. I think some sample MOUs would be great, and take them away from the general to be a little more tailored to our region, so we can start having discussions with our regional partners about entering those. So it'll probably take a while before everyone has wording that they can agree on, but that might be one of the best ways to begin this moving forward. I did attend the IBCC all-day meeting Thursday, the 3rd of March down in Westminster. And I think you were there too, Mark, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. The word implementation was used consistently and strongly, that the Governor Hickenlooper wanted to see implementation of some of these 4 portfolio items within the next 18 months and an overall statewide water plan, supply plan within 5 years. And the part of the question from many of us on the western slope was, well, are we going to see implementation of all 4 portfolio elements equally, or is it just going to say new supply development, permitting, and implementation in the next 18 months? And so there's some concern there. And so I think that does really reinforce yet further that conservation can't be something we're all just talking about. It has to be something we're willing to put our toe in the water as much as others are. And so the educational outreach efforts on conservation and some of that legal work, as you've been describing, to make sure that it really serves the river and serves the purposes and doesn't just serve to create water supplies for new development or water supplies for existing paper juniors to start taking it out, 2 feet down the river from where you just saved it. So that sort of structure is going to be very important. Some of the keys coming out of that plan were use of existing infrastructure to firm up existing conditional rights. And we've all heard that before. It's within your reports. But as we see the closure of the global settlement over in Grand County and the main stem of Colorado, that really will just push the focus further onto the Roaring Fork Valley, the Gunnison, and the Yampa White. And we are seeing that. So this couldn't be more timely to be a tool, but we're still not ahead of the curve, frankly, in terms of what these extremely well-funded and oiled machines of water development along the Front Range are pursuing. I do not want to get lost in the concept, though, that we are diverters as well. We are responsible for our own management within our valley of our own existing water rights. collectively, and we need to work to that end as well. The one last point I would really make, which I think is something to really keep an eye on the target, is it's boiling up in the statewide regional water conversations that County 1041 permitting is a problem for water development, and that we have to find a way to streamline or expedite 1041 permitting within counties, whether that's eliminating them or what, I'm not sure. But you're starting to really hear agriculture, preserving agriculture in Colorado, high priority for all of us, for both the economic development, the economic resource, the character it adds to Colorado. But that is becoming the sacred cow above all, where, and it was said very clearly by a member of Ute Water Conservancy District when I was at the Club 20 Water Subcommittee meeting, that, until you get this permitted, cleaned up and streamlined, agriculture is always going to be the easy and first target. And so if you really want to save agriculture, you've got to make the permitting happen faster, easier, less expensively, and counties, could become the sacrifice zone. Jack and I are already familiar with that through CCI in terms of power line siting. They're working on a study group now for future power line siting that would be a statewide, we're going to tell you where the power lines go, we're going to ignore how to get rid of County 1041 powers. So that's a big issue that I think we need to see this watershed plan upholding those powers and finding ways to reinforce those powers so that we can protect basins of origin. And I think that should be a strength that would enhance further county buy-in into this program going forward. So those are the things that I have at this time, and then I'd imagine you've already presented your draft findings and you've been working closely with our Healthy Rivers and Stream Board already.
Yeah, we haven't done this exact presentation, but we have talked to them a couple of times about this.
Well, I would just say, it's appropriate to really keep well in the loop with them, because they are our advisory board. Any potential first action items or first priority visible projects would be coming from them first to us to consider, as opposed to from us to them to consider. And so that's the appropriate loop, and we have some very fine, dedicated, hardworking people on that group, and they've been about 18 months in operation now, maybe a little less than that. So I think that they've really come up to speed very quickly and have a good grasp of the bigger picture, and are reliant on work that you and others have done. And so that's the real gateway in for all of us.
Well, we appreciate your support and the Healthy Rivers and Streams Board. They gave us a fairly substantial grant a few months ago that kind of got us over the top on the completion of this process. So we couldn't have done it without you.
And then you folks are aware, I think, that the Colorado Foundation for Water Education is going to be holding a Colorado Main STEM tour this year in June. Getting more of our residents to be aware of that, potentially participating in that is great. And they are currently doing articles now about the water situation. I was talking to some of the tour organizers about they do not think they will have time on the tour to come up the Roaring Fork Valley, look at Rudai. They've been trying to avoid just looking at reservoirs, but they would like to perhaps have a stop in Glenwood Springs and then use the local resources to be able to present what our Watershed Collaborative is doing, what some of our issues are in the Roaring Fork Valley, and then they're going to, I don't know if they're spending the night there or moving on then down to the endangered fish area and the Orchard Mesa irrigation district, Grand Valley irrigators and things like that. It's kind of like where it's going. So to be in that loop, and just since I have 2 minutes, and then you guys will have a little closing comment for the public, the tax checkoff on your Colorado income tax has a water restoration checkoff along with a lot of other good and worthy causes. But if any given checkoff does not receive $75,000 a year from the Colorado citizens offering to contribute to that, it is eliminated from the following year's tax checkoff. And so if people out there or on this board have not yet filed your income tax, every little bit counts, and a little bit goes a long way. But that's an important fund that a lot of watershed groups and communities depend on to do watershed restoration projects, including the Conservancy. So it's a great state source to keep active. Well, I think we've all had our comments, unless anybody has anything else, and then let you guys make a couple wrap-up comments or thoughts.
Well, I just made myself a note to send your Healthy Rivers and Streams Board and your staff a draft of this resolution of adoption, so you can, vet that however you need to and bring it back to a future regular meeting, hopefully for adoption. And beyond that, we'll, as I said, the next Watershed Collaborative meeting is on April the 7th. You're all invited to that. It's going to be at the Carbondale Town Hall, 1 to 4 p.m. I think that's on a Thursday. And we'll go from there.
Okay. Sounds very good. Jack?
Wondering, you mentioned in the memo that, or maybe Cindy wrote this, hope to complete in 2011. And we've just had a point made about potentially looking at a reso. Are we going to be asked to pass a reso on the draft document because there's not, hopefully, maybe because of all the work, significant dramatic changes to the...
Yeah, what we're hoping, and time will tell, what we're hoping is that changes to the draft will be in the form of wordsmithing to make it conform to whatever legal minds are looking at it out there on the part of the various jurisdictions. The reso calls for you to endorse the draft, but acknowledges that it's a draft and acknowledges that you may want to go back and revisit it once it's no longer a draft. But, this process that we're in right now of talking to groups like yourselves could take several months. And we wanted to try and, move that endorsement process along, put something in front of you that acknowledged the draft but didn't lock you into it, but it would be sufficient to constitute your endorsement if, in fact, it comes out basically the way it is right now. So it's finessing it a little bit, but we wanted to get something in front of you to sign, sooner rather than later.
Well, I think it makes a lot of sense because there's been so much work and it's so timely and necessary that it's appropriate to look at a resolution, and clearly it states a draft, so the formalities. But we ought to start getting jurisdictions and entities behind this, certainly.
Yeah. Well, it would seem to make sense to me that we take a copy of the draft and have, although I know you've been working with the collaborative already, Cindy, but you and perhaps Ellen Sassano and John Ely start to look at that to offer any referral comments. If there's either things that you would like to highlight for our boards as to why these are so important in the draft, or are there any, final finishing touches, refinements, things like that we would like to offer on the draft, and then we can come back and have a work session a little more internally with our staff on that plan and go from there. Because, we're not going to go through the volumes of historical data, but I think we certainly deserve to do a drill down one more level as we go to that potential endorsement. Okay.
Great.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. Pretty much on time. We're going to take a quick 5 minutes and give our staff a chance to set up for our next item, which is the 2010 fourth quarter budget update.
And while that's going on, at 2:45, we'll be bringing a vehicle around front of the courthouse for anyone who wants to carpool down to the meeting. Yeah, and
We already had too many Johns in the Hatfield.
Yes, in the Hatfield.
I was the third.
Okay, well, grassroots, I think we're ready to reconvene. Welcome, everyone. We are currently in the middle of our Tuesday, March 22nd work session for the Pickens County Board of County Commissioners. It's about 2:10 in the afternoon, and we're going to go into our 2010 fourth quarter budget update. Just introduce yourselves for the viewing public, and we'd love to hear what you have to say.
John Redmond, Finance Director.
Connie Garofalo, Finance Department.
Thank you.
We're here to, for kind of our quarterly update. In this case, it's for the last quarter of 2010. These are preliminary numbers. They're not the final numbers, but we feel pretty good about them. Overall, we're looking at a $75,000 surplus for 2010. Now, when I say a $75,000 surplus, I mean in the black by $75,000, not just an improvement on the original deficit budget. So originally we had a budget deficit of $320,000. So what we're saying is we're going to be roughly $400,000 ahead of that. So it's truly, we will be adding to the fund this year for 2010. Now, how did we get there? One of the main things that we were concerned about last year was sales tax. We had a 1.2% increase in the budget. And as you recall, we had, in 2009, we went down by 17%. And December is our largest month. December this last year was up from the prior year by 4.4%. So we had a great December. What that did for us for the entire year was it put us ahead of our budget by about 1.6%, which at the end of the day means that we were about $93,000 ahead of our budget for sales tax. In addition, the treasurer's fees increased substantially. The bulk of that is foreclosure fees. And most of those fees are related to the Snowmass Village projects. When we came in December, we talked about the possibility of community development fees being down roughly $200,000 for last year. Unfortunately, that prediction did come in to be true. And so that, well, we had some pluses, we also had a substantial minus there. And I think at that time we talked about coming to you in May to discuss revenues and how we were tracking. We'll come to you on May 10th and tell you what the progress of 3 months of sales tax will be and 4 months of community development fees for this year. Currently, the sales tax is up for January. That's the only month that we've received, but we're up about 3% over budget for this year already. So that's starting out pretty well. ComDev fees are tracking somewhat like last year. Cindy, does that feel about right?
It is about right. Although in the last week, we picked up on some building permits, and not huge, but we are seeing more volume come in, which we typically do this time of year. But that's about right. We're tracking last year.
So may I qualify that? Excuse me.
Yeah.
Well, just, John, we budgeted for 2011, we still budgeted, I think, 1.2% for sales tax on a monthly basis.
And at 1.2% annually, yes, an increase.
Right.
That's it.
Thank you. Cindy?
Yes.
Okay, it's performing somewhat like last year. Does that mean it's remaining flat, or is it on track to be $200,000 down again, in addition to the 200 this year, from budget?
Budget. We are 200,000 down from budget
In 2010.
in 2010.
And for 2011, we budgeted the same amount that we budgeted in 2010, which means
So that would be flat.
Yeah.
Because the new budget is the year before's performance.
No.
No.
That's...
No, we didn't.
No, we didn't do that. Same, I didn't know what it was going to be.
So Jack, the budget was kept flat and the performance is flat, which means we're projecting right now will probably be $200,000.
So that's where I
in
started.
2011.
Yeah.
But not 400, it's not half.
No, got you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
If
you.
we match last year's performance, we're still 200 down this year.
Can I just ask a question to clarify on the sales tax? Just so I'm clear on this. You said, well, I'll start with January. You said sales tax in January was up 3% over budget. Does that mean that we're up 3.2% over 2010? Because our budget has gone up 1 point.
I stated incorrectly. Our budget is actually flat
Okay,
compared
so
to
the
last
budget
year's
is flat, so
budget.
we're
I'm
up
sorry.
actually 3% from budget, and we're up 3% from the
prior.
actual numbers in 2010.
Yes.
The same thing is kind of stated in the second paragraph under current status of major revenues. It says sales tax up 1.6% of budget in December. Can you tell us? But then it says sales tax budget was increased in 2010 by 1.2% over 2009 numbers. So does that mean that we were up 2.8% in
correct.
actual figures?
That's correct.
Okay, just want to make sure it's clear.
Very good. Other questions before John goes on with his presentation? Please continue.
So overall, we also have another item which is interest income, which has been down. We projected it down all year. And it appears that it's going to come in. We're still waiting for the final number, but it could be down as much as $80,000. This is a number which has been as high as $800,000 in previous years when rates were quite high. So we've, over the years, have taken a substantial hit to go from $800,000–900,000 down into the $200,000 range.
What area is this?
Investment income. So,
And what are the funds that we have invested in general?
where or
No, what? Is it retirement savings? Is it contingency fund? Is it?
it's all the above,
Okay.
but it's which is applicable to the general fund. In our case, it's the money's going to come from the contingency fund of $4 million, the unrestricted of $3 million plus, the building fund, and other funds. So
You need to maintain a certain liquidity with those funds. You can't put them in 10-year T-notes.
no, we can't lock it up more than 3 years. So
And you've told us before you guys tend to tier those and roll them over, so you always have some cash funds coming up for reinvestment periodically. And we were able to obtain some higher interest rates while the interest rates were falling, just because we had older notes that had locked higher interest rates that have now matured, and when we reinvest those now, we're locking at the lower rates.
that's correct.
One quick comment on that. You know, we watched this, I guess, for 3 years spiral down just horribly. We missed it the first, might have been '08. I can't remember exactly, it was by like $400,000 or something in interest. And again in '09, last year again. I mean, every year we hit. How low can you go? And with our projections, I don't see how. You know, I've been frustrated, and I haven't said anything before, but this is almost an institutional problem. We need to get this right for the next budget, which means don't budget anything for interest hardly. And unless the environment changes, that means the financial markets.
Well, like I say, our budget has been reduced by 75%. Now, how much further down can we go? Another couple $100,000?
Multiply by .5,
Yeah.
and you'll end up, the highest you'll be.
Right.
Actually, our instruments should be a little more because we have bigger blocks of money, but in the average, it's just, we really missed the boat, and we need to solve this year, and this line, we understand what it is, we don't have a lot of control over it. At the end of the day, though, what we have control over as a board is the overall budget, and things like this, in a few areas, prevent us from making tough decisions that maybe should have been made. I'm talking about organization-wide, and that's not our initiative, that's our manager's, perspective. But this is one that we need to really stop messing around and missing, because it's got to be a minimal.
Jack, I understand what you're saying, because we all want to see all the projections as accurate as possible that we budget on. But I think that it's fair to say the market keeps sending all of us mixed signals. When we just heard from the Open Space and Trails Fund that municipal bonds to buy them are costing around 5%, and there's been different indications that, we'll be able to roll some of our future funds into higher interest rate instruments. But what I'm saying is there's consistently been mixed signals throughout the market that make it very hard to project. When we did the projection of 1.25 in sales tax for this last year, you really wanted us to stay at 0, which would have made us make some hard choices that perhaps would have been unnecessary at that time for curtailment of programs. And so it's a balance of everyone's opinions and best efforts on this.
And I understand that goes without saying, but I only speak for myself. This is an area that we don't need that large gap. Whether it's 1.2% or like this year we're flat, well, it's better to budget conservative, and I think with a few pieces in place, we might have had to make a couple decisions that we right now wouldn't have $200,000 staring us in the face like we have to do something here. Maybe we would have already made an adjustment, and that 200 would be easier to digest. I certainly hope that the budget performs better than we budgeted, and I supported the budget. So my name's on that. It's just like I finally had to say something stronger than, when we meet with FAB and we go through the numbers to set up the budgeting process, I'm going to be asking to be very conservative on this one. Thank you.
Mike?
I don't quite understand what you're saying, Jack, because what we had was a projected deficit of $300,000, and we're coming up with a surplus of $75,000. So there's almost $400,000 of income that we didn't project that we had. So I don't see that there's been a failure at all. I think, quite frankly, this has been good.
I focus on clearly one element, not the overall, and we're all happy the performance is what it is. So maybe I spent 1,000 extra words we didn't need, but anyway, we'll leave it.
No, I think the general point is very well taken, that we all want to be as accurate as we can with our projections, and as I said, the market does seem to send some mixed signals. You talk to, people just even 6 months ago or 8 months ago was, well, how long can interest rates stay this low before the pressure starts to push them up? And so, we're trying to prepare for that. John, did you have a comment on that?
I just wanted to recognize, and Jack, we'll certainly continue to try and tighten up those estimates, both on the revenue and expenditure side. I've had the opportunity coming in with a fresh set of eyes to be looking at past years and looking at how we've performed budget to actual, and actually what I've seen is a general trend that we've tightened up on a lot of those estimates. You'll see that the proposed fund balance is much closer budget to actual this year than it has been in past years. Unfortunately, those past years probably have bigger surplus numbers than we've got, but there has been a lot of effort to tighten those up, and we will continue to try and improve in those areas. And, I just wanted to recognize, because I've had the opportunity to go through several years, that there has been a significant tightening up that I can't take any credit for my time here, but it's something that I recognized. I think it's something that certainly department heads and the finance department have been working on. We'll continue to try and improve so you don't have those surprises.
Well, and the team has done a great job in the evolution of just doing budgets as far as hitting the mark, and we've been required to, especially the last few years. There's no question about it. But, for me, and it's a budgeting philosophy, whatever you do, you always do it conservatively. I'd rather say I'm going to take in less, and you don't want to unnecessarily, that's your point, Rachel, have to take drastic steps here. And that's a balance, and that's why we approve a budget with all of us, having that vote. But I am no genius, I'm no financial guru here, but I absolutely knew where interest rates have been for years and where they have been. And I don't think there's still upward pressure. There might be disturbance in the market, but interest rates aren't going to be raising right away, even with what's going on globally. So we just keep going and unbuttoning it up. I wasted too much time here on this.
We all look at these things carefully. I mean, the one thing that jumps out for me is that we really can't, or hopefully won't, see the type of foreclosure dollars come in from treasurer's sales in the next year's budget. Hopefully, a lot of that bath's been taken, and it's not going to be much more shakeout in the market that way. But that was something that was close to impossible to budget for, and was, to the good, but only at the expense of others. And so again, hopefully that won't occur again. Again, if you want to go forward, I'm sorry we keep interrupting with our kibitzing on this.
No, that's all right. And just to close on the interest rate thing, I think it's a question also of just the materiality to the overall budget. We have in essence, it's 1 to 2% of the total budget.
Yeah.
Whereas sales tax can be 25-30%. And next month we will, when we do come with the FAB to talk about the projections, I think the outward-looking 12 to 24-month numbers are never really that crazy in terms of a wild projection. It's in the years 3, 4, and 5 that we have to really look at for next year for this next month's projections. I think in some of those they are pretty high, and I think we will have to adjust some of those down. So, thank you. So overall, it leaves us with roughly $100,000 excess on the revenue side. On the expenditure side, there are substantial savings from labor and general expenses. I think the overall feeling was that county-wide, as people tried to watch how they spent their money, and they did a good job with tighter budgets. Under the projects line, we had several things not happen. I think there was a repeater for $48,000, which was not purchased, which was a substantial item. We had the security system, which I think they talked about when they came this month to talk about fixing the security system, that there would be some savings in 2010. This is showing up here. In addition to that, there are several actual revenue reductions in here. The first is we came last year with a new revenue source, which was the model traffic code. I think you might have I think it's a combination of it, when it got started within the year, and really what it's going to bring in. It came way short. It came in $48,000 short. Be aware that there's $50,000 in it, I think, for this next year. So we may be subject to risk there, to also coming in short.
And the explanation on that is that prior to adopting the Colorado Model Traffic Code locally, any revenue from tickets went to the state, and once we had adopted it, revenue from tickets came back to Picken County. Although we were very clear we did not want our people out there hunting revenue by pursuing greater traffic violation tickets, that we have more compliance through friendly warnings than we do through tickets, but sometimes it is necessary, and why not capture the revenue here locally as opposed to going to the state budget?
That's correct. In addition, we had a reduction in revenue from land management. Land management used to do the weed eradication work for the airport and the landfill. They both went out to kind of an open bid this last year and found that I think it was a combination of both the scope of the work that they wanted done and the price. They wound up choosing outside people to do the work, and that was roughly $39,000 of revenue, which we did not get. So that went away. Overall, we had savings of $472,000 on the expenditure side. And when you combine that with the other revenue increases, take out our $200,000 planned savings, net it gives us a $75,000 plus.
So would you say, John, that the majority of that savings came from unfilled positions? By the time you add in not only cost of salary, but all the benefits, health insurance?
It's half.
Half? Okay.
I would say half.
And what is our loop, our process going forward? I know we continue to do the quarterly updates, but what it seems to be the path for preparing the 2012 budget?
Well, we'll be here at to talk to you about the projections for the 2012 budget with the FAB next month. We'll also have a first quarter report just like this. And then again in May, we'll talk about revenues and whether there's areas of concerns there or need for change there. The budget process itself has already started. In essence, all departments we'll have our first meeting in May, kind of more of a county-wide kind of thing. And the budgets will probably be due in the finance office on July 1st. So it never stops. Let's put it that way.
Rob, you have a comment?
Yeah, if you wanted to comment on that. I just have some general questions.
If you don't mind,
please.
so I just wanted to know, we're also working on some potential changes that we'll be bringing in front of you for the next budget, including breaking out a capital plan that will include capital expenditures. And we've talked about this a little bit before, but looking at a capital plan that includes our road projects, facilities projects, information technology projects, which have been included generally in our operating budgets in the departments. I don't think have been really broken out and made as clear to you in the decision-making process as maybe they could be. And we'll probably have a few changes in how we're presenting the budget that we've been talking about as a staff, and we're working through the details on to hopefully provide a little more transparency for us internally and also externally for the public. So more to come.
Rob, and then
May I just follow up again? New topic. John, are we anticipating, though, reviewing a staff recommendation for some capital projects this year, separate of going forward with the 2012 budget?
specific to roads, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, because we had that work session, et cetera, so is that still on the table?
That's still on the table. We're going to take a little bit different approach because I think we're in a we have some unique opportunities to leverage favorable market conditions, and so we have an existing budget out there. Some of the priorities that were brought up, for example, Cypress Creek culverts and those sorts of things, I think we may be able to leverage those if we include them in other projects within our existing budget. And so we want to go out to bid and bring those results back to you first see if we can get them within budget, and then see if there's other projects we want to add from there. So we're taking a little bit different approach based on our last.
But that wouldn't, then those other projects wouldn't necessarily happen this year then?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we are, I think we heard, some concerns about smaller projects, and our thought is we might be able to get favorable enough bids in this environment to fit them within our existing budget.
With all the carryover money and the existing giant 400, huh?
Just what we got budgeted. No carryover, no additional appropriations. We're going to shoot for our existing.
'Cause I thought we had about 1.2 or something.
Well, there's, and Connie, maybe you can jump in, because I might be getting lost in the language of carryover.
Right.
Because
it's really not carryover.
Right.
But I was, because somehow it showed up. Please. So I don't.
That's correct. We do have, I'm not sure of the exact number, but it could be around $1 million too.
A good piece to work on.
2011
That's
budget
correct.
plus the carry
So-
forward, yes.
Good, thank you.
We're working on a proposal.
We're going to have just a little under 15 minutes to finish up with questions. Rob?
Kind of a handful of random questions here. The first one is, you say, under the sales tax section, you say, along with an increase of $200,000 from the elimination of fees previously paid to vendors. What is that?
When you do your state sales tax return, the state gives you you're the preparer, it gives you a little discount. And it came to our attention, especially through Debbie Nelson, as a way to recoup some additional money, that we could eliminate that fee. Other local districts have eliminated that fee. So actually, what was the total dollars?
I'm not sure what the total dollar.
$200,000 or something. Last year was the first year that we eliminated that fee, which in essence leaves more money for the county.
So that fee would have been paid to the sales tax
Payer.
the businesses.
Correct.
Okay.
It would have reduced the amount that people had paid sales tax to you as a vendor, yeah.
Because I know there was, for instance, for food service people, there's a gas reduction which has been eliminated in the state of Colorado, which you can deduct your gas bills from your sales tax. So there's been several of those disappearing, making it a little bit harder for our businesses out there. Another question, I just want to make sure our public knows this too, that the fund balance section that you have here, that as of December 31st, we have $3.4 million in our undesignated fund. In addition, the county has $4 million in a contingency fund, $5.7 million in a facility fund, making $13.1 million available at the discretion of the board. But the contingency fund has to be maintained at a certain level, correct?
Well, I think the board they look at it as a $4 million fund. And the GFOA says it should be 15% of your budget, which is roughly $3 to $3.5 million. But as far as the Tabor calcs go, it's less than $1 million. So it's kind of depending upon whose power you put on it.
Tabor is 3% of your appropriations. That's the legal requirement. Then over and above that, it's a business practice of what do you need for contingencies and cash management purposes. GFOA recommends 15% to be healthy for contingencies and cash management purposes. And then above that, the board can designate fund balances for additional contingencies if you're in a particularly volatile type of market or for specific projects, and that's where those other designations come from.
And in your summary of expenditure savings, first I'd like to state it really speaks to our county that there have been tremendous savings pretty much across the board here, that they're really working with a reduction in staff, and they're really looking after efficiencies and those sorts of things. So I would just like to put some kudos out to the fact that they've been operating under these circumstances, which is great. I will point out a couple of things here. One, the manager line has a overage of $76,000, $100,000 in labor, yet the general expense had a savings of $24,000. and this is for the fourth quarter of 2010. Is this the severance pay to Hillary
That's
Fletcher?
correct.
And I'm assuming the savings is the fact that we really didn't have a county manager in December,
A couple of months there.
or a couple of months.
Well, those are general expense
Yeah,
savings.
even with the vacancy in the position, the overall cost was about $100,000 for the severance.
I just wanted to point that out to anybody who might have looked this up online and pulled it out as a red flag. And then the last question that I have is just a general question on how did the departments and we internally use this information on a quarterly basis to make adjustments quickly? I think from a business standpoint, making adjustments quickly is the most important aspect of saving money. So if you're getting over on something, you want to adjust operations. Do we have an internal process of using this information within the departments to adjust for inefficiencies?
Well, as a newcomer to government, I would say we don't make quick adjustments. And one of the reasons is that unlike a for-profit business, we're not trying to maximize our profit. What we're trying to do is maximize the services that we provide. And so you have to be careful in how quickly you move. That being said, do we move quick enough sometimes? No.
But I would point out that clearly every department has tried to make adjustments and tightened up against what appropriation or authority to spend. And so I think having this information in front to see the big picture, how we're performing as an organization, we all know that we're in the same pot together as far as resources into the next year. And so I do think there's been a lot of efforts made to either tighten up on contracting, tighten up on services, tighten up on travel, training, some of those other areas where I think we're seeing significant savings, hold open vacancies in areas where that's been appropriate, especially as maybe service demands. So I think in that response, we're responding quickly, but it doesn't necessarily equate to a policy change, which I think is what John is talking about. Maybe, Rob, what you're talking about is it doesn't necessarily change our business model, but we are changing implementation to save dollars. And that's a ongoing management discussion, I think, that goes on. I know it's a discussion that I've been having with folks in my new capacity, but it's not a formal process like a change management process where we'll bring back to you and say, we've made these changes in how we're doing business. That probably happens more through the budget process.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a great point that you raise. That's part of why these guys track the budget so constantly. We get the quarterly updates if there's large decisions that needed to come forward. But as you've said, if you have a very snowy March, we don't say, okay, we're over in March, you guys stop plowing on Friday after 4. They still have to continue to do that, or other demands that seem to rise as the economy falls. And I wanted to kind of add a comment as we looked at those fund balances, which are, in a seeming sense, large. In another sense, I've said before, they're about equal to one large home in Picken County in some of the sales. But I would imagine that coming forward, this capital plan is going to be looking at and working heavily within what we have as the $5.7 million designated for facilities. We're not planning anymore for a large in-town facility going forward as much as repairing and maintaining a lot of the buildings we have. And we also have already seen the energy smart type of energy efficiencies that we've put on the back burner to see how it fits into this budget. So there's going to be the potential of some fairly large expenditures there going forward, not all at once necessarily, but in terms of keeping up the assets, just like the open space fund. Additionally, I know that being a heavily dependent sales tax-based community, in order to maintain good bond ratings and stability in case there's a no-snow year, those sort of things, you tend to look to healthier reserves than communities that perhaps are more stable income, farm income or oil and gas income. There's some counties in Colorado that really haven't taken much of a hit at all. Weld County kind of comes to mind, but others that have greatly potential for fluctuating to keep our bond rating high, you have to look to larger reserves than traditional. And one last question for you, John. You probably may have at the top of your head, but how many months now, or how many years have we been on a salary freeze for our employees?
Well, this is the second year, so.
Okay, so completing 2 full years to the end of this year of a salary freeze. And thank you. And there's greater contributions to the health and benefit plan, the health care plan this year by employees?
That's correct.
Yes, the deductible's going up.
Okay, and then one big question that the public has, especially because of Wisconsin and the national situation, we do not have unfunded retirement obligations. We are on a defined benefit plan that the employees self-manage the contribution that goes monthly, and there's no, quote, pension or obligation of county after someone retires.
Yes. It's a defined contribution.
Defined contribution.
Yeah, sorry, I was using that term wrong.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Jack, and we'll have about 4 more minutes, and we'll catch our ride down to our meeting in Elgin with the Eagle County Commissioners.
Yeah, I don't know if it's necessary for this board to reaffirm, but the $4 million we use as a contingency number, Rachel, as you just alluded to, the type of economy we have and we're more seasonal, et cetera. I think maybe this board needs to reaffirm that the $4 million is that contingency fund and we're not going to touch it. And I'd like to see it disappear from this kind of a presentation, because that's money. Yeah, we understand discretionary. We have other monies that are discretionary. But this isn't, I'm not sure what this accomplishes, because we're not intending to touch that $4 million at all. And does it add to the discussion or detract, or does it disclose something to the I'm not sure. So maybe I could ask the question, why is it on here?
It's part of our overall budget. It reaffirms that we haven't spent it anywhere. I think that is important for the public to know, that we are saving for a contingency fund. And what's perhaps most important is that each state operates under a different set of laws. And we are in a Tabor state where if there was a crisis, you cannot just go out and say, well, we need to raise our property taxes by 0.1% this year to cover this contingency. You don't have that flexibility, and that pushes you towards larger contingency funds. This is the type of money we would use if there's a major road washout that needs to be reconstructed, if there's a forest fire, it's a potential for settlement of lawsuits, it's potential for things out of left field, but things that are possible and that our community has to watch out for. We have mud and flood season coming up here really soon. But it tells all of us that we have those sort of things, some savings set aside that isn't part of our annual appropriations for capital projects. And you're right, Jack, in terms of us reaffirming that that is what its intention is.
Well, then I just might add, and certainly it's the board's choice, my idea was maybe not show it, but maybe, again, it's positive to show it. But then I'd like to at least name it a fund balance designated for Tabor / contingencies, because within that $4 million is the Tabor, a little less than $1 million.
Well, let's have a larger discussion when we have more time if people would like to rename it. This is not one person, as you've said many times, giving direction, but you're bringing it up for discussion for all of us to talk about at a future time.
I'm not asking for an answer now, but it doesn't tell me anything what it is, except it's more flexible money, but tag it, and you're right, later.
Michael, did you have a comment? I saw your hand.
Well, just that I think it has to be there. I think it's a vital part of the financial standing. Contingencies does not mean it's not going to be spent. It means it's reserved for contingencies. Typically, a contingency is an unforeseen event.
Thank you. Any other closeout comments from anyone? Nope. Thank you, John and Connie, very much for your presentation. Thanks for the good news today, and we will see you again before long, I'm sure. Thank you for your hard work.
Thanks, John.
John Mann.